Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show, and I am glad that you can be with me on this episode. This is episode 83. Just imagine we have been here under this voice, under this sky, 83 other times. And as I point out to you always, I appreciate you guys for joining me. You could be anywhere. So the fact that you're with me, I think it's fantastic. A bit hoarse this morning. I have a bit of a sore throat, but hopefully it will not last through the show. I have some good old coffee here, and we're going to drink this coffee while we do the news together. Donald Trump has been doing what Donald Trump does and absorbing pretty much all of the media space. He is a gravity unto himself. And as a gravity unto himself, he has been effectively pulling all of the conversation towards him. And let's be very clear, he was doing this even before Joe Biden's office. So the fact that he's been doing this now, it's not necessarily shocking. One of the interesting things, though, is effectively the things that he has been saying. The things he's been saying. Some of the stuff is true. Some of the stuff is so off the wall that it hints at a certain amount of lunacy. And I want to go into some of that stuff. On the positive front, Trump has come out and said that he wants to meet Putin immediately. So there's that. I think that's a positive thing. On the other side, he has come out and said that he wants nuclear disarmament talks with China and Russia again. I consider that to be a positive thing. I mean, look, from my point of view, anytime you can, let's say, talk to, make deals, make agreements, have conversations with, have open dialogue with people around the world, especially countries that are, in an orthodox sense, considers to be enemies, I find that to be a positive development, especially considering the orthodoxy and what amounts for, the normal fare of the other party is war, 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 and more war. One of the other interesting things has to do with the release of the JFK files and the MLK files. It's about time. It's about time. And he's going to be pushed to open the UFO files also. Chuck Schumer has already pushed Donald Trump to open the UFO files. And keep in mind, many of the people who Donald Trump have around him are UFO people. Rubio, Ratcliffe, these are heavy UFO guys. And there's been another positive development in regards to one of the people Trump was bringing in. Brian Hook has been kicked out. He was not able to get through. And the new person that Donald Trump is trying to bring in is somebody who is skeptical of these wars in Iran and is more open to this notion of a Palestinian state. So that is also a positive development. That's the wild part, right? Like I would tell you, in many of the other administrations that have taken place, there was nothing positive, or at the very least, nobody that I saw positive. It was so few and far between that anything that would happen with that, I would consider something I cared about in regards to people, policy on this issue of war and peace. Trump is a mixed bag at this point. And I don't mean mixed bag in regards to what he has said. I mean mixed bag in regards to the people he's put into the office. He has a Gabbard, he has a RFK Jr., there's this new person that he's trying to get through. Again, I don't hate Ratcliffe. And yet he also has people like Hegeseth and other full-blown monsters. So again, mixed bag. We'll see what he does policy-wise. On the other front, though, on the things that are just ludicrous, the idea that Russia or the Soviet Union helped America win the war, it's nonsense. It's even offensive, as I pointed out yesterday. Trump has come out saying that somebody stole hypersonic missile secrets and sold it to Russia, which again is height of ridiculousness, considering that the U.S. has not shown itself to have hypersonic missiles. So there's that, where Russia, China being far ahead of the U.S. on this particular front. Hell, even Iran seems to be further along on this front than the United States. So there is that. On the issue of the nuclear secrets and the JFK secrets, I want to play you something that Mike Pompeo said. Because somebody needs to ask Pompeo what the hell he means by this. Pompeo was asked about releasing the JFK files. And apparently he pointed out, or it was pointed out, that the reason that Trump didn't release them is because Pompeo didn't necessarily want those files to be released. Pompeo was asked about this. I don't remember when this took place. I don't remember when this took place. But Pompeo was asked about this. Listen to what he says about the JFK files, but also listen to what he says about the UFO files. Also. Somebody need to ask him about this. Let's play.
Why'd you fight to keep the JFK files secret?
Because I was trying to keep Americans safe. And by the way, don't paint with too broad a brush. 99.6% of the JFK files are public today.
But it was 60 years ago.
John, not everything was 60 years ago. And I don't want to spend a lot of time walking through this, but suffice it to say, the definition of a document covered by this statute that you're referring to, it's a little bit wonky, but suffice it to say, if Congress holds a hearing tomorrow on the Kennedy assassination, the documents generated tomorrow will be part of those files. Those would be tomorrow, they'd be 60 seconds old, not 60 years old. And last thing I'll say is there are things that happened 60 years ago that are still important to keep in the vault. There are lots of things that happened that long ago that still are appropriate not to release. Think of names and addresses and families. And by the way, there's also no value in them. These don't hold the dark secrets that everybody wants to just hold up as the bogeyman. I saw the UFO files too. We've got bigger problems. North America, lots of bigger problems. Just because something is kept secret, why not go to the darkest corners? But it's a lot of fun. I'm happy to go there with you if you'd like.
It sounds like what he's saying on two fronts. On the first front, for the JFK files, that what we knew then may be different than what we know now. Now, I gotta be honest, I don't care what he's saying here. All things being equal, those files should be released. An American president was gunned down. An American president was murdered. How is this secret information? What is this? The former Soviet Union? What is this? Nazi Germany? Where the stuff is hidden behind vaults and vaults of secrets? No, an American president was gunned down. The American public should be read it. Full stop. I mean, what the hell are you saying? That something was involved, some agent that's still around now that we should keep secret? That makes it more of a reason to display that stuff for the American public. The American public, many believe that the CIA had JFK murdered. So I feel the same way about January 6th, by the way, that all of that stuff should be released, not specific individual things. And when the feds are asked, did you have people there at the Capitol? That answer should be answered. You have created a credibility gap with the American public and its government. And I know some people are okay with that. We should be okay with that. As for the UFO part, it sounds like what he's saying is, I've looked at the files and then, there are more important things for us to worry about. Basically saying, look, there's nothing to see here, folks. There's more important things for us to worry about. So we should focus on those things. That's what it sounds like. But irrelevant. Trump has opened the files for JFK, MLK, and Robert F. Kennedy. And it's expansive. It's not, a little bit, it's expansive. It's any and everything that the federal government has in relation to the JFK, MLK, and RFK files. Release it. Now, he told Robert F. Kennedy Jr. that he was going to do this. And part of the reason that RFK Jr. worked with Trump and worked with him so fervently was A, this issue of health. So there's that. But B, on this other issue of RFK fully believes that his dad and uncle were murdered by the CIA. And the fact that he believes that, his thing is, I want to see the files. I want to see what is being blocked, what is being withheld. That information needs to be given to the American public. An American president had been murdered in broad daylight, and we need to see why. Give him credit. Trump said when he first got in, he said, I'm going to measure my presidency based on the promises that I gave and the promises that I keep. And you may say this is low-hanging fruit, fair enough, but it's low-hanging fruit that he accomplished. Good job. Good job. You know, it's so few and far between that a president puts out a promise and then keeps that promise. So, you know, I assumed that he was going to go through with this one. And the reason why I assumed he was going to go through with this one is because at the end of the day, you brought in RFK Jr. to your campaign. It will be a hard sell for you. It'd be a hard sell for you to bring RFK into your campaign and then shaft him on one of the key issues that is directly related to him and his family. So, look, I think Trump is going to get all sorts of applause for this. And that's another thing, man. If Trump ends the war, if Trump ends up creating a ceasefire in Gaza and sticks to it, actually believes and holds Israel accountable to their side of the ceasefire, releases the JFK file. Granted, again, there are going to be some horrible things that he does in his presidency. But truth be told, Trump has the potential to knock it out the park for his presidency. He does. Because truth be told, the American public, like I said, is not so ideologically wed that they're going to be all on one side on every issue. Meaning, it's not like they have this orthodoxy on every issue of either Democrat or Republican. It's a little bit of both. And all things being equal, they would allow you to do your own thing, providing you're keeping your promises. And this was always an aggravation with Medicare for All. If you were attending to meaning if you had a vision and you got elected on a vision, and when you got in office, you say, I'm going to accomplish this objective. I told you this was I was going to do, I'm going to do it. They will allow you space to do your own thing on the side, providing it doesn't overwhelm the rest of your agenda that you told them you were going to get accomplished. Now, if Trump attends to the agenda that he got elected on, Democrats are going to have a hard way to go. I just said it that way. They will have a hard way to go to get back in office. I mean, I suspect that what he wants to do is hand off this presidency to J.D. Vance, with the idea that J.D. Vance is going to follow in his mold on this issue of foreign policy, war and peace, that type of thing. And I don't know if this is his way of trying to change the orthodoxy or what, but it does seem like he's trying to go in a particular direction. It also may be grand strategy on Trump's side. What do I mean by that? In other situations where he wants to escalate to de-escalate, that may work with people who are peers. And even for somewhere like Russia, if both sides know that neither wants to go into a nuclear war, and both sides have this kind of saber rattling. Now, the reality of it is Russia knows that the only thing Trump can do in Ukraine is escalate to the brink of a war. But that doesn't stop the fact that they may still have this rhetoric war, this belligerence, this where Trump is saying these things with the idea of trying to reach some level of a negotiation where he can still seem strong in the context of that negotiation. Because an American president, usually, Biden aside, don't want to look weak, especially Trump, considering he considers himself a strong man. And so is it shocking that Trump, I mean, keep in mind, we're coming out of a Joe Biden who has literally been firing missiles into Russia. And so rhetoric doesn't equate to firing missiles into Russia. If Donald Trump is trying to position himself to A, get context to the language necessary to end the war, while simultaneously trying to, at the very least, look as if he's saving face. He's trying to get a win-win, meaning he doesn't look weak while simultaneously ending the war. Now, I don't know how much leeway he's going to get to do that by the Russians. I suppose we are going to find out. I suppose we're going to find out. But right now, up to this point, he seems to be doing two things at once. And in doing those two things at once on this front, we'll see if this is grand strategy or Trump is just radically incompetent. And the things that he's saying is just so ridiculously off the wall because he doesn't know any better. But again, I'm trying to be open and I'm trying to give the benefit of the doubt on this. But I want to bring in my guests. We are joined with Arnaud Develay. He is an international lawyer specializing in international criminal law. He participated in the defense of former President Saddam Hussein, along with U.S. Attorney General or former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark. In the wake of the Caesar Act, he documented the illegal sanction regime imposed on Syria while living in Damascus. He is author of Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of American Political Consensus. Arnold, man, welcome to the show. How you doing today? You doing all right?
Hello, Jamal. Thank you for having me, and hello to everyone who's listening.
Thank you for joining me, man. My voice is a little bit hoarse. I have a bit of a sore throat, so forgive me. I'm struggling getting the words up. It'll moderate over the course of the interview. Is Donald Trump, well, let me ask this way. Trump has said he wants to immediately talk to Putin, not wait tomorrow, not in a week. He's like, I want to immediately talk to Putin. What is that conversation going to be about?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? I mean, it increasingly appears as if Trump is not quite informed about the situation, and that in some respects, he still views the world as it was when he was in office the last time, not realizing that a lot of water has gone under the bridge, so to speak. This essentially shows that there's obviously problems in as far as what kind of information he's getting. So we understand that for now there is I would say not really a freeze per se on supplying cash and equipment,
right?
But that he's for the time being trying to set up an audit to find out where most of that money and or equipment went. What with all the stories that have been widely published for the last 2.5 years now, that there's been a lot of embezzlement going on. Some of those Ukrainian high officials are literally living in it, the high life. And so this could be because there's been talk about a 90 days freeze and foreign aid. I would not look at this this audit, as being part of this 90 days freeze. I think it's something entirely separate. But in the time being, since we know that Ukraine would not be able to sustain its operation probably beyond 60 days, in the case where the spigot goes dry, there might be more to it than meets the eye. Some would say that this would obviously provide Russia with the possibility of making the gains that it needs to secure the security of the new regions that have voted for self-determination back in 2022. But at the same time, we're still dealing with a lot of the fundamental security issues bearing on Ukraine's status as a neutral country. We're hearing also that Macron and Scholz are somehow, busying themselves trying to gather consensus in Europe for the deployment of troops in Ukraine. So it's somewhat murky. I think
Wait, real quick. Do you really believe
Yeah.
that Germany would accept that? I mean, Schultz seems to have been backpedaling. I mean, I want to go back to what you're saying with Trump for the moment, because I agree with you. I think there's a bit of grand strategy being played here. With we're going to pause funding. That funding ends up being about the 100 days that Kellogg says that Trump wants to be able to bring things to a deal. The 5% NATO seems to be a pressure valve that's also being played against Europe. In this case, you're right. Zelensky, if he's not getting money, how does that work? And also, there's something else. You're also completely right that, like, when you drop to $300 billion, if $2 billion goes missing, nobody's going to notice, right? And so you do want to have this notion of looking for grift, looking for people who got rich, especially if there was corruption that was built into the process. But I guess, real quick, do you really believe that Germany and Schultz, especially considering the pressure that Schultz is under in Germany, would be able or would even agree with putting troops on the ground in Ukraine? I mean, for one, Russia's not going to accept this, but that's secondary to the point of whether or not the German population would even go through with something like that.
Well, it's a good question. I think it's with people like Scholz. Scholz is a spawn of a certain worldview. He owes his political careers to some of those dogmatic positions that he's adopted, whether it's on the domestic front or on the geopolitical front. So in that respect, I don't think he can say much more than what he's been saying. If anything, he's staying, right, true to form.
Mhm.
And so he will live by the sword and die by the sword. If this means that he will be swept out of office next month, then so be it. But it would be really somewhat awkward for him to adopt a 180-degree position from what we've known him to say and do
Yeah.
the last 2.5 years plus, some would say. Because we're talking about Ukraine essentially, but there's also a lot more aspect dealing with the green ecology and all this thing. So the green economy.
Yeah.
So those people are very predictable in a way. So they were meeting in Davos. On top of it, so there was this grand mass of those people, and so of course he had to basically be true to form. Do they really technically believe this is feasible? It's irrelevant. I think they have no choice but to try to mitigate the already very well felt influence and impact of Trump's arrival into the Oval Office. Obviously, they are in panic. I don't think they know what to do.
Yeah.
They're trying to put a good face on it. Some of the U.S. Entrenched interest will be working with the European Politburo to try to stay the course in Ukraine, but you get the distinct feeling that that train has left the station essentially. With the Biden administration basically being out. So, but it's a big ship, and those people are so entrenched in their own worldview that we can't expect them, just because a new president comes in, to just adopt a whole new set of talking points like this, reflecting what Donald Trump and his coalition, seem to want for Ukraine. This would be tantamount to, political suicide.
Mhm.
So I'm not really looking or interested that much in what's being said in Brussels or in Davos, for that matter. But it's interesting to see at the same time that we are already seeing some of those things that we were somehow dismayed about Trump 1.0, was the fact that he was somehow surrounded by people who kept salient element of the truth from him. So we know that he's a Trump is going to do what we expect U.S. presidents to do, which is putting U.S. interest first and foremost. But Trump is also a pragmatic. But this only goes those far. If you do not get the right information, you get incidents like the one we had yesterday, where he published on his Truth Social some threats. Essentially, you never threaten your potential negotiating partner before you even begin to negotiate.
Right.
But this reveals to me that he might not know, because he would not have done or written this down if he had known what the real situation is on the ground. He's not in a position to negotiate. And where has he been the last 2.5 years? I mean, the sanctions don't work with Russia. That's the whole point. It made Russia wealthier. It brought the Russian economy to the fourth place. We had employment salaries, wages figures coming out a couple of days ago in Russia, and they've increased 28% from last year.
Wow.
So it just doesn't work. The sanction, talks are not going to work. So the Kremlin promptly actually, replied that they were not discouraged by those kind of antics. Let's call it what they are, antics. I mean, Trump being Trump, a lot of it is antics. But here it really looks like a fool. So he really needs to surround himself with people who will tell him what the situation is objectively. The problem also is Trump seems to be thinking that he has to get Zelensky on board. Why do we need to get Zelensky on board? I don't understand that. Zelensky is politically radioactive, for that matter, now. So, you could just, he's not even the legitimate president of Ukraine. And to the extent he enjoined his own parliament to adopt a resolution a year and a half ago, preventing any kind of peace negotiation with Russia. So he doesn't even have the means to politically and legally engage Russia on any kind of peace talks without violating his own decree. Or, so first things first, this decree, this Ukrainian decree, has to be removed. That would make sense.
Right.
We might be, obviously down the road looking at getting a new Ukrainian president, new elections being held. We've spoken about this before. It will take time, but you've got to go, for the jugular, and you have to somehow, start with the beginning, and that would be to remove the Ukrainian Rada's prohibition on engaging with Russia. Otherwise, this makes no sense whatsoever. Yeah. So there are means that Trump can use to pressure Zelensky to start doing the right things, rather than just running an audit.
Well, not giving him money, maybe one of those things. Like, that's what I mean. Like, I'm wondering if there's a level of deep strategy. Like, I know that Truth Social thing that he put out, it sounds ridiculous. I mean, he's saying 60 million people got killed in the Great Patriotic War, which he says that the U.S., that Russia helped the United States. Okay, for one, it was the Soviet Union, and B, the idea, it's nonsense, right? Like it's like
quite insulting for the Russians. There's one subject, a touchy subject, you don't want to somehow try to be too fanciful about, is the Great Patriotic War here.
Yeah.
So, but he just can't help himself. It just, But and I think he means well sometimes, but he just gets all his, he gets all mangled, all mixed up. It just comes out like that. It's
see, my hypothesis, yes, it does, because he's trying to do this thing of I'm puffing my chest out. I'm going to be a tough guy.
Keep it simple, man.
I think he's so accustomed to dealing with weak countries. Let's say, like, if he's saying, "Yeah, Europe, you're going to be down 5% for NATO," you're going to do that because you don't have a choice. Hey, Denmark.
Yeah, that's the maximalist approach to deal making. You start really high, and then you negotiate your way down to a level where it's still higher than anybody could have expected. But with Russia, it's not going to work.
Exactly, and that's the problem. He is so accustomed to dealing with weak countries that now he's dealing with somewhat of a peer, and he's doing this, and it's It's not the same. Russia is not afraid of Trump in the way that Europe may be, or in the way that Denmark or Canada or Mexico even may be. Russia is afraid that Trump is going to do something where they're going to end the world. That's a different fear, as opposed to being afraid of an American president. I want to play this for you. This is something that he said yesterday, I believe. And I want to get your take on this.
And Zelensky, I will say this, he wants to settle now. He's had enough. He shouldn't have allowed this to happen either.
No.
You know, if he's no angel,
Right.
he shouldn't have allowed this war to happen. First of all, he's fighting a much bigger entity, okay? Much bigger. When he was, you know, talking so brave and so, now two things happened. They were brave, but we gave them billions of dollars. The United States spent $200 billion more than Europe. Why did we spend more? You know why? Because Biden never asked Europe to spend more. They spent 200.
It became
you know,
a U.S.-Russia proxy war because of
look,
Joe.
Zelensky was fighting a much bigger entity, much bigger, much more powerful. He shouldn't have done that because we could have made a deal, and it would have been a deal that would have been, it would have been a nothing deal. I could have made that deal so easily. And Zelensky decided that I want to fight. You know, they have 30,000 army tanks. Russia has 30,000 army tanks.
They will use them.
Zelensky had none practically. You don't fight those. Now, then we started pouring equipment, pouring. And they had the bravery to use the equipment. But in the end, that's a war has to be settled. So the field is interesting because it's very flat. It's great farmland, okay?
That's what I mean, right? Like, he is, he will put out the Truth Social post, which is just full of nonsense. And then he would come out and say something like that, which is like, Zelensky should have never fought that war. Zelensky could have, you know, there was no chance for him to win that war, etc. Give me your take on this. What are your thoughts?
Well, again, this is somewhat very strange. I mean, obviously, we all know what happened. I don't think Zelensky was given the choice. Zelensky wanted to the draft of the peace treaty, or at least the ceasefire,
Istanbul, yeah.
roughly negotiated in Istanbul. So, if this did not happen, it did not happen because Johnson came in, probably in coordination with Blinken and the former Joint Chief of Staff Lloyd Austin, who actually met about that same time for the first time in recent memory. The head of State Department and the head of Secretary of Defense, Defense Department met and issued a joint statement on the course to be followed, which was to basically supply Ukraine. So Zelensky found himself pretty much under the thumb, as he had always been. Yet Zelensky was always a puppet. Obviously, Trump is not going to be saying Zelensky is a puppet, but to put all the blame on Zelensky is somewhat critical. It just didn't work. You guys, you know, went with him. He was your proxy. You gave it a shot. There was a strategic objective, which was to downgrade Russia. And the whole thing blew into your face, and it's unmitigated disaster. So it's time to do some introspection, I think, rather than blame, you know, the errand boy, Zelensky.
Yeah,
that's my take anyway.
Yeah, because, you know, they're going to blame Zelensky for losing the war. They're going to blame Zelensky for the war being started.
Sure.
They're going to blame him for everything, right? We were blameless. We had nothing to do with this. It was all Zelensky.
We all come back to this old, you know, Kissinger trope. You know, America has no friend, and to the extent it has allies, you know, the allies are even in a worst case scenario situation than the enemies. So he will be thrown under the bus. I always said, I said it last year, you know, as the counteroffensive, the vaunted counteroffensive failed, he should have gone his own way and engaged with the Russians behind closed doors. He would have, you know, if anything, preserved his own legacy. But now he appears for what he is, a pathetic clown, which doesn't even make anybody laugh anymore because of all the blood that has been spent. So, you know, I hope it was worth it, Zelensky. I hope, you know, you met up with all that money And I hope you can watch yourself in the mirror. That's all I can
He
tell him
should
now.
he should use some of that money to buy a piano so he can play it with his penis again. Maybe he'll get people to like him some more. What's funny about this, and I'm glad you mentioned Zelensky directly. Arestovich has been recently, I'll say, he wasn't in the beginning, but recently he's been a vocal opponent of the war. And specifically Zelensky, effectively saying you've sold out your country. You've given, this is not beneficial to Ukraine, what you've been doing. You've effectively sold us out. You've been getting all of these people killed. You've been losing all of this territory. How is this a good thing? I want to play this clip to you because this is a brutal clip. And I agree with him on this, by the way. I think leaders have philosophical responsibilities to the countries. Well, not just philosophical, but ethical and legal responsibilities. Listen to what he says here. And do you see any chance of this taking place?
Юля, Зеленский будет трепыхаться, он уже изо всех сил трепыхается, судя по
All
тому,
right.
что он несет.
So this is in Ukrainian. Damn it. But basically what he's saying is the system, and I'll just read it just so the audience can hear it. Let's restart this. He says, Zelensky will struggle. He's already struggling because of this nonsense, but the system doesn't even see him as president. It's another publication. And that's the end. If Ukraine does not save him, then they definitely won't win the elections. He'll fade. And then they'll file criminal cases against him. They'll bring him back in a cage. Do you see that as being his ultimate end, to be effectively either shot or put in a cage at the end of this war? Effectively, like whatever new administration comes in, prosecuting him for this. What are your thoughts on this? What are the chances of this taking place? I mean, the previous presidents in Ukraine, correct me if I'm wrong, were prosecuted. And Zelensky himself has been threatening to prosecute Zelensky if Zelensky runs against him. So these kind of political prosecutions are not foreign in Ukraine. What are the chances that if Zelensky runs a new election, loses that election, that they would turn around and look at the war and prosecute Zelensky for that war? What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't think he'll run again. To be perfectly honest.
Really?
Yes.
I mean, because some of the reporting was that he didn't want Zelensky to run against him, which implies that he was going to run. But give me your take on this. Why don't you think he's going to run again?
Well, because it's all about dressing up a process right now. And to the extent Ukraine is presented to the public as, an independently minded entity, they have to somehow, upgrade the software. So they've got to put somebody entirely new in it. And, it's like Francois Hollande back in 2016. He was hovering at 4%. He threw the towel, instead of trying to run for re-election. He's like, I'm not going to make a fool out of myself. But here we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who lost their lives in the futile war, which could have been avoided, which, he could have avoided, if he had that statesman gravitas to him. So, no, I don't think he'll run again. But I do agree with you that unless he gets the somehow the wherewithal of the change, in the wind direction, if I were him, I would start packing and fast. Because he will be blamed for the whole thing, and he will be prosecuted, and probably I'm not sure about what treason entails under the Ukrainian civil code, but or constitution for that matter. To the extent there's a constitution, so he might never get the chance to spend the money. It's getting hard. Like I said, he had a window last year. He could have done something where he could have completely, turned the table on his masters, negotiate something with the Russian, or at least, somehow prevent certain things from being done so as to facilitate on the battlefield a solution that would have put an end to this, and sought refuge in Russia. The Russian would have provided him with shelter and humanitarian ground on humanitarian ground, and they would even have allowed him to take some of the loot that he made. But now it's too late for this.
Cocaine is illegal in Russia, right?
No, no
Cocaine
drugs
is legal in Russia.
no, it's not. It's not legal.
Yeah,
No drugs
that's what I
is.
thought.
Yeah.
So
No,
see,
no,
that would have been the
very well. He's gonna have to go into a clinic. But I think it's a short price to pay, you know.
yeah.
It's
I mean,
that, or you know, you'll end up like Mussolini. I think a lot of Ukrainian families are hoping to get a chance to get their hands on you and your wife.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
no,
I mean,
it's the greed. Some people used to say in the popular culture that this is what drove economies. Greed, ladies and
mhm.
gentlemen. But in Zelensky's case, he tried to stick around too long to try to grab as much as possible in that days of substance of his. And in the end, I think this is what's going to cost him because it's too late now. You can't make a deal of that nature anymore.
Yeah, he's been
It's
tweaking.
out
He's
of your
been,
hands, and there's a new your sponsor are the new ownership, and they've decided that they want to cut their losses on this, and they need you to be the fall guy. And
mhm.
this is what if he hasn't understood that he's to be the fall guy in this whole thing, that reveals a lot about Zelensky. He was in a game that adult plays, not kids. This is not a comedy. This is not a. We're not in the movies here.
Yeah, this is real life.
Yes.
You're getting all of these people killed for no reason. The thing though that I think Zelensky would probably, because the thing that Boris Johnson was really holding on Zelensky's head was the issue of security guarantees. Effectively saying you're not going to get any security guarantees from us at all if you're willing to make this deal. Because when he got in office, his first instinct was, I'm going to bring this war to a close, or I'm going to make amends with Russia. There's no reason for us to be in this kind of conflict. Somewhere along the way, that changed 180. And even though when the special military operation began and the Istanbul agreements initiated, the fact that they initiated showed that he, on some level, was open to some level of negotiation at that point. When Johnson came in and effectively said, cut this out, you're not going to get any security guarantees from us. Is there any way, like from your point of view, how would he have thread that needle? How do you get through that? Where your Western sponsors are saying, we're going to fight this war. We're going to give you all the money in the world, all the economic assistance. We're going to give you all the military assistance. But if you don't fight this war, you're not going to get any guarantees from us in a security standpoint. I mean, it's the reality of it. Okay, well, you haven't gotten security guarantees from us anyway, considering we lost 30% of our territory and nearly 600,000 people. Like, where's the security in that? Even though that was the argument that it was couched into of security guarantees. Give me your take on that, because that is what Zelensky will probably say 3 a.m. between him and his God. If you ask them about, well, why did you go through with this? Why didn't you attend to the Istanbul agreements? Why didn't you come up with a way out, as opposed to getting to this point where all of these people have been killed? You've clearly have lost the war, and now you have a new president who's just cut funding to your government. Give me your thoughts on this. What do you think he would say here? Or better yet, were security guarantees enough? Is there another better way out that, like you said, a better statesman could have worked his way out of this?
No, I don't think so. For the simple reason that Zelensky ran on a platform predicated on respecting the Minsk Accords. So he only has himself to blame for not having followed up on his campaign promises. There's a very famous press conference where he just got elected very recently at the time. We're in 2019. There's Putin is there, Hollande is there, Merkel is there, and he's there. And there's someone from the audience is asking a question about, the search for peace and to, respect the Minsk Accords, essentially. being, central to this to preserve Ukrainian territorial integrity, because this is what Resolution 2202 called for. You respect the Minsk agreements, you will keep all of Ukraine, including Donbass.
That's right.
But they are the 14-point memorandum that you have to follow, especially the top 3 of them. You have to engage with the legitimate local authorities in the breakaway republics. You have to stop shelling civilians, and you have to respect Russian-speaking minorities. None of that was done. And during that press conference, he actually somehow esquisses a kind of a wry smile, like looking as if there's no way this is going to happen. I'm just here. It's a casting job, and he was cast. After Poroshenko and his kind of chocolate king, oligarch, corrupt, they had to go for someone whom the Russian could take to. And Zelensky made most of his career in Russia. He speaks fluent Russian. He worked in Russia. He was only co-opted by this Ukrainian oligarch, Kobolovsky, as a gimmick to basically, again, dress up a process which would, again, provide enough time for NATO to finish the job of retooling the Ukrainian army and massing it alongside the western borders of the breakaway republic at the appropriate time. With the idea, as the Rand Corporation white paper described it, to downgrade Russia at its borders. So this was part of something that goes way back, and Zelensky was just, hired as an actor for the job. That's it. So there was never any issue of providing security guarantees. The idea was to, if it had succeeded, inflict a strategic defeat on to Russia using Ukraine as a curtain. That was it.
I want to play this clip. I want to go back to Trump, but before we close on this, he said this basically because during the Trump administration he brought in John Bolton. John Bolton was a lunatic. John Bolton was a lunatic's lunatic. He still is, unrepentant lunatic. And during the time frame, they were getting rid of some of the nuclear treaties that were hard fought, negotiated. If I'm not mistaken, during the Reagan administration, Donald Trump got rid of them because if I give Donald Trump the most delicate eye or delicate evaluation during his first term, it was being claimed that he was working with the Russians, that Vladimir Putin effectively chose Trump years before he got into office, and that Trump was this Manchurian candidate that got elected because Russia helped him over the finish line to get elected, and that he was completely obsequious to the Russians. I mean, it was nonsense. But this was what they were attacking him with. This was kind of the context to which they were using to evaluate his presidency for years, even up to having this kind of dodgy negotiation, investigation, the Mueller investigation taking place. And again, none of this was realistic. All of this was nonsense. And yet, if they would have been able to find anything, they would have tried to take Donald Trump out of office, whether it was real or imagined. Well, they didn't find anything because there was nothing there to find. The entire thing was ludicrous on its face. But my point in saying that is because there was a context that they were looking at Trump through, or the lens they were looking at Trump through, Donald Trump felt that he needed to take the hardest position that he could possibly take. John Bolton was brought in, sanctions were applied, nuclear treaties or missile treaties were eliminated. So Trump has come out and said this. Now, there's the problems with this because right off the bat, you had treaties with Russia, and now he wants to add in China. China has nothing to do with these negotiations. It's almost like he's trying to come up with this kind of new architecture of the world, not just architecture between the United States and Russia. But I want to play this. This is Trump talking about having these kind of nuclear talks with Russia and China on the issue of disarmament. Now, again, I have no idea how you would get anywhere near this, considering that we are firing missiles into Russia proper. But nevertheless, I'll let him make his case.
We'd like to see denuclearization. In fact, with President Putin prior to an election result which was frankly ridiculous. We were talking about denuclearization of our two countries, and China would have come along. China has a much smaller right now nuclear armament than us, or field than us, but they're going to be catching it at some point over the next 4 or 5 years. And I will tell you that President Putin really liked the idea of cutting way back on nuclear. And I think the rest of the world, we would have gotten them to follow. And China would have come along too. China also liked it. Tremendous amounts of money are being spent on nuclear.
Again, yes, I agree with this. Look, I hate this idea. You know, the moment that I get a gun, you have to get a gun too. At the moment that I put a missile in space, you got to put a missile in space too. And you think of all of the money that is being spent on that stuff. Give me your take on that. I mean, does China really like the sound of that? Does Russia really like the sound of that? Is that something that the U.S. and Russia could legitimately negotiate on, where you could take one step and move to the next step? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, I think you're right. I think Russia is very amenable to this. Actually, the Kremlin published a bulletin yesterday, including one of them bearing on the need to resume disarmament talks. Obviously, you mentioned the INF Treaty that was signed and ratified in 1987 between Gorbachev and Reagan. And we see now that with the use of the ATACMS, Scalp and other assorted types of intermediate missiles, you are entering a very dangerous space here, because it's not regulated anymore. So to prevent any kind of accident from happening, and we do know that they have a propensity to happen, those accidents, despite all the mechanism put in place, you need a very robust architecture bearing on disarmament. And to the extent Trump's approach was to, I'm not going to renew the pre-existing accords with Russia because I want to include China. Well, if you were sure that you have time to deploy this policy and engage China, which I'm sure China would also be amenable to it, because it's in their interest, it's in the world security interest to have those weapons, the strategic weapons, regulated. They would have joined in, but the problem is the INF Treaty expired in 2019, and a year later he was engaged in his campaign for re-election. So that's not going to happen during the last year. Add to this the Russiagate, mechanism put in place to prevent him from even engaging with Russia meaningfully. Those things could not have taken place, and so it might have been better to go with what existed at the time, and then eventually sign another bilateral treaty with China in a separate. Trump thought he likes this kind of grandiose, grandstanding diplomatic stunt, foreign policy successes. So I guess he conceived that the idea of having, the three leaders on the stage, signing a consolidated treaty might have been better for optics, but you ran out of time. You don't have time to do this. So yeah, but I think it's a very promising and encouraging step in the right direction, and I think Moscow and Beijing will be very receptive to this. Of course, negotiation will have to take place, but it's definitely something that you want to do. As far as John Bolton is concerned, yes. Well, Trump basically was a real estate developer from New York. He arrives in Washington. He thinks that if he gives some concessions to the blob by recruiting the likes of John Bolton, let's recall that John Bolton back in 2005 said that it would not prevent him from having a good night's sleep if the UN building fell by 10th floor. That's John Bolton.
Right.
But so sure, yeah, John Bolton. Yeah. Say what? Yeah, that's what he said.
He was a lunatic.
Yeah. Bunker, that's his name, Bunker John Bolton.
Yeah.
That's what they called him. But we saw that this was not the case, that, you could surround yourself with the most hardcore neocon, and, you're an outsider, man. You're, like George Carlin used to say, it's a small club and you ain't in it. That's what it is. He was, too rough around the edges, not a Ivy League graduate. Someone against whom we have no compromat, because a lot of those people are controlled through, compromising files. Most of them on the hills, and so everybody holds each other by the beard. This is how it works in DC. And here's this guy coming in, and he's clean.
Mhm.
How can one forget, when he ran in 2015? And he attended a meeting of APAC, and he went out and said, "I don't need your money." Notwithstanding the fact that, the guy was groomed by Roy Cohn, right? He's definitely not anti-Zionist. He's his own daughter. He's married to one of the main advisors to Benjamin Netanyahu. He's one of the main founders of the settlers movement. It's hard to find, more of a commitment to the cause, some would say.
Mhm.
But he's not under control, and this is the thing about Trump. Trump is his own man in the end, and that makes him unpredictable, and they don't like that. So they tried to neutralize him during his first term as much as possible.
Yeah.
They obviously cheated him from what was due to him in 2020.
Oh, I don't buy that. He just lost. I don't believe.
Well, we don't want to get the algorithm.
Yeah, right.
But and then they pulled that. They pulled that mail-in correspondence. Obviously that played a big role.
It was COVID.
Of course. Yeah.
And to make it worse, Donald Trump told his people not to go to the polls. Like the ridiculousness of Trump telling people in Georgia, like he's trashing mail-in voting, he's trashing all of that stuff, and then the people don't show up in Georgia, and he loses both seats. And Georgia, and he loses Georgia. Like, just outrageous. And this time around, he didn't do that.
Right.
Vote early, vote often. In any case, vote early and often.
But the point is, they threw the whole kitchen sink at him. They tried to imprison him. They tried to impeach him twice. They sent some of his supporters. They threw like 91 charges against him. And if we go with with what we saw with our own eyes, they try to actually take him out, right? So, we'll see. We'll see what happens. But obviously, things did not go according to plan. Let's put it this way with Trump. And so anything is possible. There's already talks of trying to amend the Constitution. It has no chance of getting off the floor, but there was a House member from I don't know which state again, but this came out today. But he basically filed a request, a draft law proposal to get the Constitution amended so that he could run for a third term.
I saw that. Republicans were so full of shit on this stuff. Like, the reason FDR was the reason that Republicans went after this idea of having only 2
term limits
because they couldn't win. Like FDR could have ran for like 15 terms, and he would have won every 15 terms. He just died in office, and then after that, they were like, "No more, we're not doing this anymore." And then you get Trump, and they're like, "Hey, 4 more years." 4 more years.
But the guy just got into office a couple of days ago,
four more years. Man just got into office. Like, they don't, we're talking about like an 81-year-old man at this point. When he went
78 now, I think.
So
by the time, he will be 81, 82 years old, yes.
Yeah, we don't even know if Trump's going to be alive in 4 years. We're talking about 4 more years. 4 more years. Let's amend the Constitution. Just ridiculous. And then they're like, wouldn't it be great to have an Obama versus Trump runoff? No.
For those people.
No. But, these old men, we're sick of these old men running for office. the wild part about the nuclear reduction talks, it's, you get to a certain point militarily where there's no way to win. And then it's like, okay, well, what kind of world do you have? What does war look like in a context where there is no way to win that war? Because all things being equal, you have two sword holders that both of which can end the world. And if there's any conflict, then the world ends. And so, I don't know what a world like that looks like. And I guess what we're seeing is a world like that now, where what you get is proxy wars, where the major participants only threaten each other, but they don't necessarily want to get into a war because all things being equal, everything will come to an end. And so I guess on some level, it makes sense to have these kind of nuclear reduction talks. Do you ever foresee a situation with these guys agreeing that, hey, if we can have talks to reduce nuclear weapons, then that is proof of concept for the fact that you can have talks to get rid of these weapons in their entirety? Or there's always this notion of a backstop and nuclear weapons being that backstop just in case, which means, no, they're not going to get rid of nuclear weapons. All things being equal, you may get a reduction in the amount or limits in the amount, but getting rid of them is no.
Well, I think the underlying question is whether or not we should have a Yalta 2.0. I think this is long overdue. Obviously, the unipolar moment has passed. It died, despite what happened last month, it died in the sands of Syria. And with BRICS on the up and up, predicated on national sovereignty, respect for cultural differences, decision adoption through consensus, and trade, just privilege trade and development. I mean, why can't we just have enough there's enough room on the globe for everyone to cohabitate and collaborate for the betterment of mankind? So why does this have to be? The problem that we're somewhat alluding to here implicitly is this American exceptionalism. And when you look at the inaugurational speech, the speech was replete with allusion to American exceptionalism. That's, to me, the problem. America can be premier inter pares. No one is calling into question, America's contribution to world history. That's not the issue. But the fact that you have to repeat it constantly and do a recap constantly and take liberties with history even tends to reveal a sense of insecurity somehow for those who would be watching on the outside.
Yeah.
So don't worry, you don't have anything to worry about. Everybody still today dreams about moving to the US and living there. Millions of people, for that matter. And America, the world without America would not be the same. But the same can be said about the world without Russia.
Yeah.
So let's just basically have a big powwow. Let's develop spheres of influence among the three main superpowers, and let's engage in responsible policy making.
Do you think that that's what Trump wants? Like this kind of Bretton Woods, like a new Bretton Woods 2.0 with the main powers on the globe being China, Russia, and the US? Is that what this kind of nuclear reduction talks, a stalking horse for? But do you think, no, it's very specific to the nuclear reduction talks. He's not talking about this kind of new Bretton Woods. He's talking about a very specific, narrow reduction in nukes among the main principal actors, with the idea that those talks allows negotiation and allows a relationship, allows open dialogue that may further future talks. Does that make sense? Like, is it something that's more expansive in regards to security architecture of the world? Or do you think he's talking about something very narrow? What are your thoughts on this? I mean, how do you think he's framing this in his own mind? And look, I know it's dangerous, right? Trying to get somebody to get into Trump's mind and what he's trying to go for. But he does seem to be going in a particular direction with this stuff that I consider to be positive.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with Trump's own style in terms of verbosity and how he goes about expressing ideas. It seems to be a fatra, kind of messy and havoc up there. One wonders, what's going on in his brain. But there's a method to the madness. and Trump likes to put feelers out there to see, feel the temperature of the water. So I think there's a sense to what he's doing now. He's trying to find his marks. He's been out for 4 years. The world has changed considerably since then, and he's trying to find his marks. Who can he really get on with, and who should he, basically stay away from?
Yeah.
And he's trying to define for himself. And he's a guy who goes with instinct also a lot. But he's trying to define what are the confines of what can be accomplished with the big boys, the other big boys, i.e. Russia and China. And he's also, mind you, he has to take into account the blob behind him. The blob is addicted to war. It's been thriving, feeding at the throat of forever wars. This has got to go. So, if you want to redefine the world order, and as one of the big three, you've got to put an end to those forever wars. You got to show signs that you are willing and able to sit down and have responsible and mature discussion with your counterparts. So he has to proceed somehow, kind of like a crab that walks on the beach in kind of diagonal,
Yeah.
Because he has to watch for those guys behind him.
No, I agree with you. I think that's
so you cannot just go out there and say on day one, I'm turning down, turning off everything. All the troops are coming home, and he's talked about this. He wants to bring 20,000 U.S. troops from Europe under the pretext that the Europeans are not paying enough. But the idea is also that why do we have all those? There's 50,000 U.S. troops in Europe. 80 years after World War II.
I know.
Go home, man.
They're just power projection. They're there for influence.
But he has to be careful. Remember, he has to be careful.
No, I agree with you.
Because this machine can crush you.
Yeah, I think this. Yeah, I agree with you. The Orthodox is so accustomed to war. Like I remember with the North Korea thing, and he's like, he makes agreements with North Korea, and America flips out. Like the media loses their mind. Oh my God, I can't believe he's doing this. I can't believe he's, And it's like, what is wrong with you people? Like, how are you guys? It's like you guys are addicted to something that you're never fighting in. It's that. Arnaud, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. I always appreciate talking to you. I enjoy these conversations. Arnaud Develay, he's an international lawyer specializing in international criminal law and participated in the defense of former President Saddam Hussein, along with former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark. In the wake of the Caesar Act, he documented the illegal sanctions regime imposed on Syria while living in Damascus. He is the author of Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of American Political Consensus. Thank you, my man. You have a good day. Be safe.
Thank you, Jamal. Have a nice weekend.
You too. Bye-bye. All right. The man of the hour, Peter Coffin. Peter Coffin is a journalist with over 250,000 YouTube subscribers, podcaster, and author. In their book, Custom Reality and You, they explore a world where profit is the driving force. My man, how you doing this morning, Peter? You doing all right?
I'm doing very well. How about yourself?
I am doing well, better that you are with me, and I'm glad that you're with me. Just for the audience to know, Peter was with me at the event with Caleb Maupin, the Center for, what is it, American Progress?
Center for Political Innovation.
Thank you, Center for Political Innovation.
Co-director.
American Progress, yeah, that's a whole different organization.
Yeah, no. As much as I like the idea of American Progress, I think Political Innovation is a better organization.
Yes, it is. Much better, with better priorities in regards to what they want to accomplish. But the event was really good. I mean, it was cold as hell, but the event turned out to be really good speakers.
Thank you.
Give me your take on what, if a message, if there was like a summary reading, like a more world leaders speak, that's a summary reading. What would that be for that event? Because I thought, from my point of view, my speech was my framing of what I thought the event was in my own conception of why I thought it was a good thing that the event was trying to reach for. Give me your take on what you think and the reason and the rationale of that particular event.
My speech was also very much along those lines. It's kind of you know, we're obviously entering a new era, a new world, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in a position where a president who the previous term was sort of universally derided, he was not somebody who was particularly well liked, which, I mean, you could say partially is because of how he acted, partially because of how people around him acted. And this time around, you know, he seems to have intentionally purged a lot of those people and has made promises very much to the contrary. Now, the president, of course, is not the main thing that drives anything. If the people want something, the people can get it through whatever means they want to take. There's very, very different ways that people can do it. People can vote. People can have revolutions. History happens despite Fukuyama's declaration.
In all things, end of history, yeah.
And we're here to take a look at this from a positive perspective. Yes, there's going to be stuff Donald Trump does that we don't like. That's just a given. He's a Republican president. The fact that he's done a lot of the things he's already done is almost shocking from either the perspective that he's Trump or a Republican. Either is kind of shocking. But we want to take the good and attempt to, you know, use it. We want to do what we can with what he does that we actually want to have. For instance, we all talked about this at the event. There's a ceasefire in Gaza that they've been trying to get for 4 years. He wasn't even sworn in by the time we got it. It was crazy. And the TikTok thing, I talked about just seeing new things happen. We don't see that, and we haven't for a long time. Whether you want to talk about his first presidency, there are a couple of good things, of course. When he met with Kim Jong-un in North Korea, I keep talking about how people still don't understand the significance of that, because it's the entire time I've been alive, nobody's even tried, you know. Right. The fact that somebody tried, even let's say he went in there and got nothing accomplished, it's shocking one of them would even try at this point. It's so to me, you know, there's a lot of tentacles of the octopus of U.S. imperialism and British imperialism and French imperialism, all this. And there is a unique opportunity in the good things he's doing that allow us to maybe advance an agenda against imperialism. And again, that's not to say that he's going to be a great president by default. I'm not necessarily expecting that. I'm not necessarily expecting that we're just going to have nonstop, let the good times roll, et cetera, et cetera. I'm guessing we probably won't, actually. But I said this, if there's no economic system, it doesn't matter what economic system we want. If that's just leveled, if there's no economic system, there's no buildings, there's no people, there's no anything, there's no reason. The phrase that we've been consistently using is only peace can make America great again. And I think a lot of this is encapsulated in that. It's putting a qualifier on the idea of make America great again. You can say make America great again all you want. Yeah, that'd be great. I would like it to be great. Cool. What would do it? Peace is one of them, because they spend so much money on all these useless wars around the world, and all they do is kill people. So if we'd stop that, A, people would hate us less, and B, we would have more money to spend on the problems in the United States.
I would like people to consider for a moment what it looks like if they would have spent $10 trillion on America. Like, think about the scale and amount of $10 trillion. And think for the moment that as opposed to just pissing it away in wars, getting people killed, that we would have decided, let's spend that here. Let's build high-speed rail. Let's make sure there are no homeless people. Let's make sure everyone has health care and education.
Over 10 years, Medicare for all was forecasted to cost $34 trillion. That'd be a third of that.
Yeah.
That'd be a third of that. That would be over 10 years, too. I mean, we spend money like it's nothing at this point, but over 10 years, that'd be a third of Medicare for all, which, by the way, would cost the American taxpayer less in tax money than the private system that we are on. Like, we actually subsidize it more so than we would subsidize a fully public system.
I mean, we spend all of this money for healthcare and get worse outcomes. And, you know, maybe it's time to do something different. I mean, like, that is so much money. And we just print that money like it's nothing. But if you turn around and say, well, hey, we need to expand Social Security, we can't afford that. We can't afford that. That's too much. It's like, but we just spent $10 trillion on a war. I know that's why we can't afford it, because we spent $10 trillion on a war. It's like, okay, dude, come on. Or being on the trains, for example. And, you know, if you've ever been on a train in Europe, they have high-speed rail. They have trains going all the way through Europe. You can effectively get along through Europe without driving or anything else. That is not really the case here.
And they have Taco Bell now there too.
You say and Taco Bell?
Yeah, they have Taco Bell too. So you can take the train to various Taco Bells all across Europe now.
Very cool.
So I mean, the benefit here, it's them 1, us 0. Like,
yeah, Taco Bell, man, they're killing
Taco
it.
Bell
We
and
have Krispy
trains. You
Kreme.
can
They
get
don't.
there with trains.
We have Krispy Kreme though, so you know.
Yeah,
they're
no,
back.
that's a very good point.
Yeah.
So I mean, let's say 2 to 1 then.
Yeah. Speaking of things that are good, this is decisively one of them, and I want to get your take on this.
Sir, we have an executive order ordering the declassification of files relating to the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
That's a big one, huh? A lot of people have along for years, for decades. And everything will be revealed. Okay. Give that to RFK Jr.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I want you to notice what he said too. He said, give that to RFK Jr. Because, you know, part of the deal that RFK took in order to back Trump was, I want those files released, and I want all of them released. It's been 60 years. Release those files. And promise made, promise kept. That's something else Trump said. He says, I'm going to measure my presidency based on the promises that are made versus the promises that are kept. Now, I would argue this is low-hanging fruit. So what? Oftentimes, you don't even get low-hanging fruit. And to be very clear on this, like, this is pretty damn expansive. I mean, the UFO community was talking about this because of how expansive it was, where they were like, whoa, we need more of that. So right here, it says, I have determined that the continued redaction and withholding of information from records pertaining to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy is not consistent with the public interest, and the release of these records is long overdue. And although no act of Congress directs the release of information pertaining to the assassinations of Senator Robert F. Kennedy and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I have determined that the release of all records in the federal government's possession pertaining to each of those assassinations is also in public interest. The key point here is all records associated with the federal government's possession. So anything that we have on those issues must be released. That is not, you know, things between this year and this year. It's not that. It's everything that the federal government has must be released. Applause.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, applause.
I mean, you say it's low-hanging fruit. So is working at McDonald's for an hour, but like,
no, I agree with you. Yeah.
Who does it? Who does it?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, this could have been done by any president. It's clear that this is an executive order that is worded strongly, and nobody, you know, couldn't have done that. It's just nobody did.
Yeah. Joe Biden could have done it. Obama could have done it.
Yeah.
Clinton could have done it. I mean, Jimmy Carter could have done it. You know, you can go all the way back down the list on this stuff.
Absolutely. Everybody after RFK, JFK, and MLK were killed.
Yeah.
Every one of them should have done it.
And by the way, he has a damn good point. It's like, how are we really making this argument that we are a country that believe in rule of law? This idea that, you know, when the Soviet Union opened the files and people were shocked. And, you know, the reality of it is we try to act as if, well, we're better. We have an open system. We don't have a system. Well, we have a Stasi, and we have secret courts, and we have secret information and censorship. Oh, no, we actually do. And the fact that this languished for 60 years, they literally murdered an American president in broad daylight. Or in MLK's thing, they literally murdered one of, like, a civil rights icon. If there is a larger one, I am unclear of what it would be in the United States, especially in regards to African Americans and civil rights in that context. An American civil rights leader.
Arguably one of the most important figures in American history.
Yes.
Absolutely in modern American history.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have fouls that are effectively hidden on both of those. How does that work? And so,
and the files that we do have, the stuff that we do have, particularly of MLK, are like letters that the FBI sent him trying to coerce him into committing suicide. Like, imagine what they've been hiding.
Yep. Yep. So the fact that he is doing this, God bless. This is a positive. This is a great thing. I guess the catch becomes what's going to be in those files. And because I am super curious at this point, because the reality of it is, if those files were kept for that long, there's a question of what the hell were they keeping in those files? Why did you feel the need to keep these files for 60 years? Now, Pompeo pointed out that there are agents that may still be alive that was around during that time. And I'm like, so what?
Okay. So,
yeah, so what?
If they've done something wrong, let's prosecute them.
Exactly. Shouldn't we know? And how
do you 85?
Yeah, it's like
nearly that.
And then there's a secondary question of like, what the hell did they do that this needs to be private 60 years later?
Exactly. Like that's a totally absurd like idea, like a counterpoint to releasing those files. So I'm sorry, I don't care. Like all of those people back then, like the reason we want those files is because there's alleged wrongdoing. Like it's like we don't know what that wrongdoing exactly is, but we all know that the stuff that we know that has been released either doesn't add up or it points us in the direction of there being wrongdoing. Like I mentioned, the FBI trying to coerce MLK into offing himself. It's I mean, I can't imagine a good reason. Oh no, there's somebody still alive. Okay, well let's say Hitler was still alive. Let's say he was still poking around Argentina. Wouldn't we want to extradite him and prosecute him?
Yeah.
I can't, like, what?
Look, I'll tell you, the magic bullet thing by itself is enough to open up every last one of those files. The idea that a bullet freezes in midair and then hits somebody else, it's like, okay, dude, this is absurd. It's like, are you serious right now? Like that by itself is enough. And that, you know, doesn't even measure up to this fact that they murdered an American president in broad daylight. Many Americans believe that the CIA was directly responsible for murdering Kennedy. And so, like,
they had the motive.
Yeah, well, and that's RFK's point, by the way.
Yeah.
That's what he believes. He fully believes it. He fully believes that the CIA had his uncle murdered, which is the reason why he wanted those files open in the first place.
Well, I mean, would you?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Of course. Right. Yeah. I mean, give me your take on this, by the way. What do you think the significance is going to be for Trump on this?
Well, if it actually does reveal, you know, what a lot of people assume it may, I think that's going to be highly significant for Trump because, to be frank, it's very possible we have all been lied to for, you know, in my case, my entire life. Your entire life. We didn't live in a world where JFK was alive. So if there are lies that is predicated on, there's never been a time that we have not been lied to about it. And to me, that is highly significant for President Donald Trump. If indeed this reveals things that indicate we have been lied to, you know, this is the first. And I don't want to sound too much like I'm blindly praising this man, but this is the first American president that has decided that it's not worth lying to the American public about these things. And it's not great that somebody has to be in the position of, you know, I don't think we should lie anymore. Maybe we should tell the truth. I don't necessarily agree that there should be one person in that position, but I mean, it's hard for me to even say it. Like it's if he actually releases those things and they turn out to contain information that contradicts what we've heard our entire lives, that's massive. And like you said, it's low hanging fruit. This is something that any of them could have done. And you know, it almost I hate that I don't like using this word with him because I think that it's much more ambiguous than this. But in that respect, it would definitely cause many people to look at him as a hero. It just frankly like on that
item.
Yeah, it's huge. It's massive. even though it's and I do agree with you, it is low hanging fruit. Any of them could have done this. Any of them could have stepped up and had just an iota of balls. Like, but they've already tried to kill this one. They've already tried to do that a couple of times. And to be frank, I think he's just like, all right, well, let's just show them why the presidents end up dead sometimes.
There was some guy, I don't even know who the guy was. But he says something to the effect of, I think it was a billionaire or something. And he says they hate this guy and they wanted him out of office such a degree that he wanted him in office. That basically said that Trump was scaring the hell out of people to such a degree that he thought to himself, what on earth is scaring these people to that degree? And if indeed these elites are that terrified, then maybe this is the guy that should take office. Now, I don't agree with that logic. I mean, there could be all sorts of reasons not to want somebody in office, and they could be legitimate reasons.
I mean, you could actually be afraid of nuclear war.
Exactly.
I mean, it's not like any of them actually want nuclear war. They want war, but not nuclear war.
Mm-hmm. One of the other issues that are out is January 6th, that there is a lot of, let's say, controversy around Donald Trump's releasing all of the people for January 6th. I take issue with this too. I mean, Stuart Rhodes of the Proud Boys, and I forget the other guy. These guys were literally planning an armed overthrow of the U.S. government. Let's be very clear, right? Like, they had guns sitting in Virginia waiting in order to bring those guns into D.C. if Donald Trump would have given, I don't know, the word to bring on the revolution. They were armed. They were ready to do it, right? They were like, and then somebody was like, well, yeah, but that's a thought crime. Dude, that's not a thought crime. That's a doing crime. They had the guns. Like, it wasn't like, yeah, we were just thinking about, no, they organized, they had the guns themselves. They were waiting for the word. That's not a thought crime. That is the doing thing. If that was the case, then you didn't need the guns, right? That's disturbing to me. That's disturbing to me. In fact, that's more disturbing to me than what was taking place on January 6th with the people fighting cops. Because the matter is,
the actual events of it were really not that big. It was kind of a small riot. Like, people want to talk about it like it's an insurrection. It absolutely wasn't. It was a riot. That's
worse than people getting guns. Because the first thing is like, what are you doing with those guns?
Yeah.
Who are you going to shoot? You're going to shoot cops? What is your objective with those guns? What do you plan on doing? You're going to shoot members of Congress? Like, why do you need weapons in this political context? That is disturbing. That is terrifyingly disturbing. So yeah, from the standpoint of them getting put in a cage, God bless. They earned that. That is nonsense, bringing weapons to political.
I think the unambiguous, just like a blanket pardon, I think that's the problem here.
Yes,
because there are people who didn't really do anything that should have been pardoned. They just kind of showed up and milled around for a while. And
it's like my grandma was at January 6th and they arrested grandma, and grandma, sitting in a cell.
Yeah,
for
exactly.
3 years.
A few people who just have no business being in jail. And I think those people definitely should have been pardoned. But I think the problem is with just like a blanket pardon. In his mind and a lot of his supporters' minds, they're not thinking about those people specifically, because if you think about the riots in Minneapolis, for instance, they all wanted those people arrested. They all wanted those people, in jail and all that. And they really weren't doing anything more than what the people at J6 were doing. I don't like when people take, I mean, you could make an argument either way. In some ways you could even say, like, the Minneapolis riots were worse because they were destroying, they were
burning down police stations.
Yeah, they're burning down police stations. They were burning down, I was thinking more about community members, small businesses. I think that's arguably worse.
Yeah.
But I would also say, ultimately they weren't, planning an armed insurrection in any sort. And that's kind of what I'm getting at there.
Exactly.
I don't really like the idea of rioting, whether it's one or the other. But I do think that there's a clear double standard with these two events. If you start talking about it in depth, I think there's a lot of things where I think there's people on, there's very fine people on both sides. Like, no, that's not what I'm going to say. But there are people in in either of these events that should have been prosecuted, and there are people in either of these events that shouldn't have been. And I don't think you can give a blanket answer to either of these things. And the fact is that's what Trump did. He gave a blanket pardon to anybody who was involved in legal proceedings following one of these two events. And would he have done that with the other? Absolutely not. And I think that there is nuance to either. And again, there's people who should have seen consequences to either, and there's people who shouldn't have. And to me, that's the problem with that. It's not one of those things where there's, a single explanation. It's something you can't really blanket go, all right, well, this is what we're going to do with that event, and we're not going to talk about individual actors at all. No, you should be talking about individual actors and making case by case decisions on that. And I think it's not prudent, and ultimately, I do, like you said, it allowed some very unsavory characters to run free after literally planning. And in some cases, here's the thing: a lot of leftists think, oh, we should do an armed revolution. Like that is on the minds of a lot of those folks. But the fact is, I don't think that's really a great idea. I don't think that is necessarily something that you never do. I think that there are reasons why you do that at some point. There are people get pushed up against a wall eventually. But I mean, you should try to do other things first. And I'm not even talking electorally. I'm talking about, there's a lot of actions you can take that aren't storming the Capitol with weapons. And, a lot of the people who think these people, this is the other double standard. This isn't even Donald Trump. There are a lot of these types of people who think we should do that, just unambiguously, spontaneously take our guns to the Capitol and create a communist utopia. And I disagree with those people as well. And I think if you do that, you're basically creating a condition of terror in this country. You're scaring people. These people who wanted to bring weapons to the Capitol, in that case, scare people. They scare me. I don't like the idea of that. So on the other side as well, I disagree with that in general. I think there is, a point in time where that is a necessary thing. You get backed up against the wall. There's a reason why the American Revolution happened. There's a reason why the Russian Revolution happened, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot. And those things are justified. It's not like those just came out of nowhere and terrorized people. But they came after being pushed up against a wall. Like the American Revolution in particular everybody was being taxed without any representation in Great Britain, which is, just atrocious if you think about it for more than 5 seconds. I get it, but this isn't what we should be doing. We shouldn't be seeing those types of events happen and then just blanket pardons. It's not good. It's a terror situation. It scares the regular citizens, because if they can do it here, or if they can, right on the street, kill Brian Thompson. I realize that these are a different class of people. There are certainly the people who are ruling, but a lot of people don't really make that distinction. They all think they're temporarily embarrassed millionaires, and they get scared when people start shooting, even if it is the people in charge, and they feel like the people in charge don't act fairly. A lot of them think, well, if I could be in charge, I would act fairly. And they see themselves getting shot in that situation. And that just scares people. And then there's, people who don't think like that at all. They just think, oh, there's people getting shot. That scares people. I don't know. It's a situation where I'm not somebody who endorses the violent route first. I don't like the idea of shooting first and asking questions later. And I don't like the idea of pardoning people who are like that, because there's a reason why we say, I don't want that. We don't want that as a country. The only reason we should ever quote unquote want that is because there aren't other options. And there are, to just be clear, there are other options on the table. So I disagree with pardoning. I don't know what else there is to say about the pardon. It was wrong to do it unambiguously. It was wrong to do it, with just a blanket pardon of everybody.
Yeah, the blanket pardon was outrageous. There were people out there literally fighting cops. There were people out there literally putting cops in ER, and
there was over 100 officers injured. It was
exactly
not a low number of officers injured, but to be fair, also the actual casualty that was a direct result from and action was Ashley Babbitt.
Correct.
The police officer that died of, I think it was a heart attack.
Yeah, it wasn't related to that. I mean, Democrats always like to conflict those things. Like people died. It was like, yeah, Ashley Babbitt died.
A lot of nuance. Sadly, there's a lot of nuance in that event in a lot of different ways that nobody official wants to discuss at all.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just another instance of that.
And they want to spin it to their own ends. And so, you know, it's like, as opposed to kind of like the JFK thing, open up the files.
Yeah.
Like when they asked, for example, when they asked Merrick Garland, hey, did you have FBI agents? Or were there FBI agents at the location? And he didn't want to answer the question.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you don't want to answer the question. You have a lot of Americans who believe the FBI was directly related to what happened. And because, you know, the wild part about it is that what they were planning in Congress was more calamitous than what happened on the ground. And what happened on the ground pulled attention away from what they were going to do. Like, for example, when they were saying, you had House members who saying, well, we want to challenge the results of the election. And then you would have had senators who would have went along with the challenge to the results of the election, meaning they were trying to throw that election into chaos. And that's not the January 6th. That is what they were planning on doing. And the moment that you got January 6th, it was impossible for Congress members to go through with it because it was such a lightning rod at that point, meaning by definition of what happened on the ground, they could not go through with the chaos that they wanted to go through with in a legislative sense.
I
and
agree
so there's a lot of people who believe that the feds were related in some way to what happened, especially when you get into people like, what is that guy's name? He was like, he says, I'm going into the Capitol. I may be dead tomorrow, but damn it, I'm going in. I don't care if it's legal or illegal. And then ended up not going in himself. And he said this on camera. The feds acted as if they couldn't find him. Didn't prosecute, despite the fact that he's on camera screaming that he's going into the Capitol.
Oh, I know who you're talking about, but I don't
I
remember.
can't think of his name. It'll come to me in a moment.
He was streaming the whole time.
Yeah, he was streaming. He was like, he did all of this, and the feds
literally
didn't
brought
charge him.
in. Yeah,
until the very last minute, where they were just humiliated into giving him this kind of slap on the wrist charge, even though they were throwing grandmas in a prison for like 3 years in custody. So I agree with you mostly. I mean, Malik and I used to get into arguments over this. January 6th is a bit different. And the reason why I said January 6th is a bit different is because that is a direct attack on the electoral process, which the government, by definition, is not going to take lightly. Like,
no, absolutely not.
From the government's point of view, you're trying to put a knife into the republic proper. Whereas the other one was riots that were mass all across the United States. Now, the problem that Democrats have with this is that, you know, when you got like either January 6th or if you had the Palestinian protests for the war, Democrats take a very hard-ass position on that. You know, they hated the protesters at the universities. They tried to act like the protesters were violent. They were not. And yet, for Minneapolis burning down, where they were literally creating spaces that were non-cop, American spaces, as if they were creating their own little commune in these various places. Okay, that's outrageous. And, you know, you're burning down police stations, you're attacking and destroying small businesses, you're taking public spaces and saying we are now commandeering this public space for whatever particular reason, and this is a no police officer space. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. And, you know, the wild part is Joe Biden has speeches defending that. Meaning Joe Biden will go out there and defend that practice and what was taking place all across the United States. Now, look, 90% or 95% of the protests were peaceful. It's the 5% that's the issue. And I would imagine people would make the same argument on January 6th. Like, it's the 5%. That's the problem. But again, they don't make a distinction in that 5% to everybody else, just like Republicans don't make a distinction in the 5% to everybody else for the Minneapolis one. Like you said, it's more nuanced. It's more complicated.
And it's really important to make that distinction too, because if you're going to, especially if you're going to pardon people who are in legal process, I mean, you really need to be specific about why. Not only for the fairness of the legal system, which we allegedly, it's supposed to be fair, it's not, but not only for that sake, not only for having a functioning justice system, but just for the sake of understanding, hey, the difference between a legitimate action and an illegitimate action. Why would we want to protest, or why would we not want to, go overboard and do all of this stuff that is maybe not effective because it's not organized, it's spontaneous, it's just flying by the seat of your pants. A lot of these things, particularly the stuff that was going on in Minneapolis, was not organized. It was just stuff happening, and that's when you end up doing damage to stuff that you shouldn't be doing damage to. Again, community members, businesses. A lot of people act like small business owners automatically bad. They're the same thing as the big capitalists, et cetera, et cetera. That's not the case. That is not the case. They're usually barely hanging on compared to the big capitalists.
That's
Walmart
right.
comes in and destroys all the mom and pop shops, like
That's right.
and it's not avoidable. It's something that has to happen based on how things work. It's the question of, why do things work this way? That's really, and we avoid that when we start talking in the way that we're talking, where we're just kind of like, it's blanket good or it's blanket bad. And it's not helpful, because again, in the case of the Minneapolis things, or in the case of the January 6th things, again, it's the 5% people that are not good actors, or just rather maybe not good actors or bad actors. They're excessive and violent and want to cause, legitimate chaos, legitimate violence, et cetera, et cetera. And most of the people don't want that. Most people don't want violence. Most people, I think, get up in the morning and they want to do their job and they want to have a decent day and not deal with shit. Like, that's basically what people want. And
safety, security. Yeah,
exactly. Safety and security. And the thing is our current system has not been providing them with that. And that's the reason why people are all riled up. So, arguably, the question is then, do we need a new system? I would argue yes. Do we need to violently attempt to make that system from step one? I would argue no. I think you start doing things that are not violent, and if you get backed into a corner, that's really that you have to fight back. But you shouldn't think of it as anything other than that shouldn't be the goal, to get into violent fights with the government, to do violent acts and stuff that, frankly, it sets a precedent that will be used against you.
Yes, I agree with that. But yes, I agree with that. Oftentimes, the violent acts are effectively used as a reason or as a justification.
Yes, absolutely.
The problem that I have with the January 6th thing on some level, especially to go back to this for a moment, especially the Stuart Rhodes of the world, those people don't care. Like, you have a group of people who don't care about process. Like, I'll give you an example. Let's take a lower level example. Democrats used to always make this argument to the left that we're in it together. Your lot with us is better off than you being on your own. And in the same way, when we had, New Deal Democrats, you might have had the more conservative member of the Democratic Party work with Democrats as a whole in order for public policy. Okay, well, now we have third way Democrats, the Bill Clintons, the Hillary Clintons of the world. And now we want the Bernie Sanders types to work with us. And so then it's like we have an agreement. You can latch on with us because you're the weaker party right now, meaning you're the weaker element of the Democratic Party. But if a situation happens where you're the stronger party, we will also latch on with you. And so there's this kind of tacit agreement, this unspoken understanding in regards to relation that creates the entirety of the Democratic Party. All right, fast forward to Sanders. You get Bernie Sanders, who is obviously the stronger party in that. He's the only one with a coalition. Hillary Clinton couldn't fill an outhouse. And yet you got the situation, even when it was Joe Biden, when Bernie Sanders was running against Joe Biden, where Chris Matthews comes out and said the most honest thing in the world. Hey, maybe it's better that we let Trump win as opposed to letting Sanders take it, because if Sanders wins, he's going to take it for a generation, meaning he's going to fundamentally change the Democratic Party. And we, as third wave Democrats, don't want that. So it is better to just tank it as opposed to allowing Sanders to fundamentally reshape the Democratic Party. By the way, something that may need to happen, that, like, allowing the process to go through organically may have netted the Democratic Party not just an election, but also a coalition in a way that it doesn't have now, as opposed to right now being in the middle of the wilderness where people despise the party. That deal wasn't real. Like, meaning it was hung out as a fig leaf for the left to latch on, to work with third-way Democrats. But when the situation reversed, they weren't in regards to this notion of working hand-in-hand with policy. I'm saying the same thing is true for many of the people that were either in Congress, where you have all of these people who didn't care whether or not Trump won. They just wanted to take power if power was available for them to take.
Sure.
Those, I mean, and the same thing is true for whether it was Stuart Rhodes. Those people didn't care whether or not Trump won in earnest. They just saw a means of taking power, and they were perfectly willing to take it. And I would make the same thing about the people who were burning down police stations or robbing liquor stores in the middle of a protest about a cop killing a man. Like, there's an element of the population that just doesn't care what's real. They care about affecting their objectives, whatever those objectives are, whether those objectives are to the betterment or to the worse. And oftentimes they're to the worse. So it's like, I don't know how, it's almost like regardless of policy or regardless of take, you almost have to keep those people in mind. Yeah, I don't know.
It's the Joker, baby.
Yeah.
I'm the Joker, baby.
Yeah. Some people just like to see it burn, right?
Yeah. Yeah, Bruce.
Yeah. Some people just like to see the world burn. It's like two geeks that was like, what the hell are they talking about? Batman, man. We're talking about Batman. I want to move to a different story. So, ex-political writer reveals cowardly editors, and I'll show this article. During the Hunter Biden laptop thing, recently Trump, something else I approve of, got rid of the 51 intelligence officials. Damn it. There we go. Got rid of 51 intelligence officials' security clearances. And, part of it, it's like, well, dude, you guys, Blinken, and just for the audience who don't know, Blinken got 51 intelligence officials together in order to say that the laptop was Russian disinformation. Even though the feds at the time knew all the way back to 2019 that the laptop was real. And if you go back and you listen to any questions that were ever asked to Hunter Biden about the laptop, at no point did he say it was fake. So it was understood that the laptop was real. The dick pics of Hunter Biden, for example, kind of gets across. Hey, is that your penis? Is that your penis, or is that a digitally added on penis? When you're sitting in the bathtub with, doing crack, is that you, or is that an AI version of you doing crack? No, it was him. It was him. He was hooking up with those porn stars. It was him.
Penis is mine, but the crack is not.
Right. When he's measuring the penis.
The penis is mine, but the crack is not, sir.
Right. So they knew all along that the stuff was real. And yet they still had these quote unquote 51 intelligence officials organized by Blinken to come out and said that the laptop was Russian disinformation. Now, and they did this because in the debate, Trump brought out, look, man, Joe Biden is corrupt. And you can see it in the laptop with that corruption, with all of these deals with the various companies and everything else. And so there was like, well, 51 intelligence officials said this was Russian disinformation. So Trump, one of the first things that he did was effectively kill their security clearances, including John Bolton, and even removed a security detail for John Bolton and Mike Pompeo. John Bolton found out, I think at 12:01 in the morning, that the security detail was removed from it. I approve of that, by the way.
I do as well.
It was a massive psyop against the American public. So God bless him for it.
It's entirely consistent with revealing the JFK, RFK, and MLK files.
Yes, it is.
They're obvious lies have been told to the American people. And it's honestly, again, like you said, low-hanging fruit. They should have done this right away.
And they did it purely for political ends. Meaning they knowingly lied. Now, Brennan is trying to say, well, wait a minute. We never really said that it was Russian disinformation. Okay, nonsense, asshole. Sure. You know exactly. Yeah, you know exactly what you were trying to communicate. And just to show Brennan's thing real quick, right here. And I do have a point for this. This is a lot of wood to chop, but I do have a point.
I have for the past number of years since I left government service was for the benefit of the government, so that if the CIA or another government agency wanted to call me in to discuss a classified matter, they could do that. And so it was really for the government's benefit. It was facilitate those classified discussions with myself, as well as with former directors, as well as other former members of the intelligence community that had those clearances. So again, yesterday's EO was bizarre, among many of the bizarre executive orders that he had signed out. And as you point out, he misrepresented the facts in that executive order, because it said that we had suggested that the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian disinformation. No, we said it was for the hallmarks of Russian information operations, including the dumping of accurate information, which is what we said in that letter. So again, this was just, his effort to try to get back at those individuals who have criticized him openly. And
He's so full of shit. He's so full of shit.
Okay, so let's say that's exactly what they said, which, by the way, is not exactly what they said. But let's say it's exactly what they said. So you are against the release of real information? Like, let's say that's straightforwardly true. He's full of shit. But let's
Brennan is trying. Real quick, Brennan is trying to imply that they were not getting across that the laptop was Russian disinformation. Meaning he's trying to say, well, we never really said, and we never really tried to imply. Yeah. He's obviously lying. I mean, even in that statement.
If you even take him at face value, if you assume that that's not even true, that we're full of shit, he's literally saying that they were against the release of real information. That's what he's saying there. So it's like, okay, and then layer in the fact that he's full of shit, and that's exactly what they said. They told MSNBC to say it, because let's not forget how much MSNBC consults the CIA, like openly so. They said it on any interview that any of those people were on. They did just outwardly say it's Russian misinformation. No, I'm sorry, you don't get to come out and say that. That's absolute bullshit. That's absolute bullshit.
He knows. I mean, the entire point of Blinken getting them together was to say that this has the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. Okay, so he's trying to say, well, we never really said or tried to imply that this was Russian disinformation. Okay, but you just said, even in that statement, we just said that it has the hallmark. That's like when you're arguing with somebody and it's like, well, I never said you cheated on me. I just said it seems like you cheated on me. Okay, dude. Like,
no, 100%. Yes, exactly.
That is super aggravating.
I'm not trying to say you pissed me off. I'm just trying to say I am pissed off at you.
Right. right. I never said that you were the one to do it. Now, the reason why I went through all of that is because on top of Trump getting rid of those people, we find out that ex-political reporter reveals that the editors were burying reports, and not just burying reports, were effectively pushing reporters to not report on Hunter Biden laptop. Yes. And by the way, this wasn't something that's just at Politico. This was something that was obvious all across the political space.
Yeah.
If you remember, they put New York Post in Twitter jail when they came out with that story. I think it was Miranda Devine that was released that story. They put them in Twitter jail because they reported the story. You had the New York Times and all of these other media organizations refused to cover it. And then it was like, I think it was like a year or two later, where they come out and say, hey, come to find out this is real. And then you get prosecution of Hunter Biden using the laptop to prosecute Hunter Biden. And mind you, they did all of this after the presidential election took place, after the damage had been done in regards to Donald Trump's campaign, because Donald Trump was trying to use that as a October surprise to get in office. They effectively had a massive psyop against the American public, using their quote unquote security clearances as this kind of, let's say, underpinning or undergirding these claims that this was Russian disinformation. Just outrageous. Give me your take on that. Like, well, the reason why I love your point of view on this is because you wrote the book. On Custom Reality and You. And fact of the matter is, they were creating a reality by insinuating that this wasn't real, and a reality that might have actually won the election, believe it or not, for Joe Biden.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you could also even just go like the whole lab leak theory. That's just anti-Asian racism. Like, I mean, it's all we get this all the time. I mean, in certain cases, it certainly was racist, but
Well,
a
we
lot more
don't know.
credence has come out
But
to that lab leak theory.
yeah, that's what that
to
was
the
about
point
to
where a
say.
lot of government agents have indeed said that that's their belief. That's I mean, people who are in office right now and were throughout the Biden administration have said that is what they think it was.
Yeah.
So, I mean, on one hand, they do create a custom reality and they do tell us that it's this way, but then they also, when it's convenient for them, they change it. It's like it's way more customizable. Like we can put aftermarket parts on it, you know. we're really going layers deep on this whole idea. Like, and this is what really particularly bothers me about it too, is when they say, no, it's actually this way. When they start coming out and saying, no, the Hunter Biden laptop was real, they don't say that they ever acted like it wasn't. They act like the whole time they're like, no, it's been real the whole time, and we thought it, and we never did this to you guys. We never lied to you guys about it. I was like, no, you did. You did for a long time. You absolutely. It drives me nuts because obviously, like you said, I made a book about this. I talk about how they customize reality, not only at this level, but also on an individual level. They'll give us different, marketing and different demographics that we can all, identify with and assimilate into. And we all have our different, people like to call them bubbles, but I call them realities because that's literally how people are, they're functioning in different realities.
Yeah.
And
workable point of view.
And they expect us to just, all right, I guess this is reality now. I guess this is, and it's such an insult to our intelligence as human beings. And I understand that we've had a lot of information withheld from us, and it's not always easy to make the right decision about everything. But we're not stupid. We don't deserve to be treated like we're stupid. And that's what they do, though. They treat us like we're a bunch of idiots and that we're just supposed to follow them no matter what they say. And when they change what they say, it's fine because it wasn't really like that before. I don't know. I often get very frustrated with this. I could probably go in circles about it for a long time. It's awful. Like, it's literally one of the defining crimes against the American people is how much they've just put our brains in a blender and put it on high. Like they treat us like we're mush. We have mush brains. And it's partly because they give us enough information that we can operate like we have mush brains. It's just that we're all, if we were given the information from the start, we're all capable of making decisions that make sense. We're not stupid, and we're treated like we are. We're treated like kids. We're treated like, well, not just like kids, but like kids that the parents don't respect. We're treated badly in that. I don't like it. I don't like it very much. like the guy in Spider-Man.
We're lied to constantly.
I don't like him very much.
We're lied to constantly. I mean, like, and then they're always shocked by this thing when the public doesn't give mainstream media credibility. Like, they're always shocked by it. They're like, how dare you say that we're not being credible in this moment?
The media is a lie. How could you possibly say we're lying to you? We have It's like, well, because you've provably been lying. You literally contradict yourselves from 2 years ago and act like you weren't saying that 2 years ago. You've been lying to us. Like, you knew what it was 2 years ago, and you said it was a different thing. You were lying.
Yep. Yep. And Rayer, this is former political reporter. This was during I was looking for the clip. This is the clip where he points out, we were discouraged from running the story. And look, I've worked in a newsroom. I get it. Like, people act like,
well, you have a boss in a newsroom.
You have a boss.
It's not like you're an employee. It's not like you like how you and I are currently is we don't operate with a boss. We're both YouTubers. We say what we want, et cetera, et cetera. But even to some extent, we're algorithmically incentivized to say or not say certain things. Now, whether or not that actually affects us is ultimately our decision. We're not going to get fired, but we will get restricted in our traffic. A boss is a lot more direct, and they can fire you just right off. They don't have to shadow it.
And look, man, I will tell you, I have been threatened for covering certain stories with the veracity that I did. Israel being one of them, where because at the time there was this thing about where Israel was like, oh, there were prolific rapes and there were systemic rapes of Israeli women and hostages, and they were cutting their heads off for babies.
Outright
And
false.
all of this stuff was false. But if you called it false, people were like, oh, I don't think we can say that. And I remember at
so
the
you're
time,
pro rape. That's what I got. I got people on my ass about how I am for the harassment and abuse of women. And it's like,
which is
no, I'm
nonsense.
very much not.
My point was, show me one.
Yeah.
And I think on the show, I pointed out, I was like, even the New York Times at this point is saying that this is nonsense. This is not true. They weren't able to validate it. Hell, that was a recent thing where they were making the calls for people to come forward and nobody came forward.
Yep.
And so it's like, okay, so where are the systemic rapes if this is true? And management was like, the next person who says that will be fired. And it's like, dude, what are you talking about? This is literally coming out of the New York Times. And it's like, meaning this is not just me saying it. This is where the paper of record, the gray lady who has every incentive in the world and is effectively, ran cover for Israel on this. Like they would be perfectly fine with saying, here are all these women that were raped during this particular moment. They didn't do it. They couldn't do it. It wasn't fair. And so it's like my reporting on it was correct. Didn't stop the threat from potentially being fired. Brianna Joy Gray got fired for backing and for pushing very hard on this issue of Israel and Palestine. People, especially on the left, were potentially losing their jobs over this stuff. So, people have newsrooms. They do have this kind of upward pressure. And by the way, I say that, and I worked for a company that was far more free, meaning for all intents and purposes, this was the only issue that I had where there was like pressure associated with that issue, where I had cleared my desk out. I had assumed, all right, I'm going to be fired over this, because from my point of view, it's real. I accepted that, I don't agree with management in the way that they're dealing with this issue. And if this continues, then I effectively will lose my job. And I accepted the fact that I was going to lose my job. I cleared my desk out.
Had Jeremiah issue there. You couldn't not say it.
Yeah, this is kind of the James Baldwin thing. It's like there is a massive amount of pressure that is being applied onto this because of this fear that was in the industry. And look, I guess my point is, I was far freer than any of these other media organizations.
Oh, definitely.
To be honest and straightforward. It's just this was a specific issue. I mean, hell, even the war, like working at a Russian radio station, they weren't even all that hard ass about the war in Ukraine. They were hard ass about this one. And so my point is, there's always pressure at any radio station that you're going to work at or any television station. And when you're getting into mainstream media, it is even more so. This guy was pointing out that a story that was perfectly true, completely legitimate, that they were being pressured not to run or not to cover. This is ex-political reporter. I'm going to play the clip.
Another great example, when Politico did that terrible, ill-fated headline. 51 intelligence agents or former intelligence agents say that the Hunter Biden laptop was disinformation, or bore the hallmarks of disinformation. Turns out that story was closer to disinformation because the Hunter Biden laptop appeared to be true.
But then Facebook also pulled all stories down about the Hunter Biden laptop, and I think Twitter did at the same time too.
Correct. They punished the New York Post. It didn't help. I mean, Politico, my former employer, and I knew at the time, didn't do itself any favors. I was covering Biden at the time, and I remember coming to my editor and saying, hey, we need to write about the Hunter Biden laptop. And I was told this came from on high at Politico. Don't write about the laptop. Don't talk about the laptop. Don't tweet about the laptop. And the only thing Politico wound up writing was that piece that called it disinformation, which charitably could be called misinformation at the least.
That's astonishing. And I don't mean astonishing in the sense that it's shocking. No, it's not shocking.
No, it's not shocking,
obvious.
but it's
astonishing.
Yeah,
that's
it's
astonishing.
awful.
And again, just to be clear, it wasn't just Politico.
No,
it wasn't just Politico. I am curious though whether the things that we would never get to see is whether or not the White House was involved and how thorough the White House was involved. We know, based on the Twitter files, that the White House was directly involved in doing and pushing social media companies to get rid of certain information or not to display certain information or shadow ban certain information. And we know that people in media also have personal contacts with elements in government,
Yes.
especially the higher up you go. And I'm curious on whether or not this was this kind of internal pull of let's not upset the apple cart, we don't want to cover this, or whether this was more of a direct don't cover that story.
Well, it's a good question. I mean, obviously both have the same outcome, which is sometimes when I can't figure out which one it is, I ask, do they have the same outcome? And it ends up, in this case, in my opinion, it's yes. So will we ever actually find that out? I don't know. So it's unfortunate, but it's probably just, I mean, whether or not it was Politico, not wanting to upset somebody or somebody being upset already and saying, hey, don't do this.
Mm-hmm.
They were still telling their employees not to do it, which is wrong. Like, it's factual reporting. It's factual reporting that is very relevant to the election that was going on, which is, I mean, it is directly contradictory to what we are told journalism is about. That's the big problem here is, we're supposed to have a free press. We're supposed to, I mean, it's literally part of the First Amendment that guarantees free speech. We're supposed to have a free press. We're supposed to not be able to stop people from saying what they want to say or what is presumably true.
Right.
But that's arguably not true in the type of system that we have. Custom reality is predicated on the idea that we don't actually have free speech. We have paid speech. We have the more money you have, the more allowed to talk you are, because you could own a platform or you can have the network that allows your platform on other like Twitter or Facebook or whatever to be untouched, et cetera, et cetera. You don't have the ability to just freely speak. And this is, in my opinion, one of the most clear examples of how that works. The reason why he can't talk about that stuff while working at Politico is because that's how he pays his rent or mortgage. That's how he buys groceries. That's, I mean, because he does not have the money to speak freely in that situation, he can't. So no, we don't have free speech. And that's exactly how all of this comes together. You have power over you telling you not to speak. It's just not formal.
Yeah. He said, don't even tweet about it.
Yeah.
Don't even tweet about it. Don't even use your own personal account to tweet about it.
There's no law in the book saying you can't tweet about it, but there's a guy who in his office brings you in and shuts the door and says, hey, don't be tweeting about that. Don't talk about that. It's not in our interest. You cannot do that and keep your job here. And it's like, all right. I had that same problem in Benton Harbor, Michigan, when I was on news radio. I had a show on news radio. Yes. I was constantly critical of the Whirlpool Corporation, which is a big multinational corporation that's headquarters in Benton Harbor, Michigan, which is an 80% black city with at this point in time, a $21,000 median income. It used to be $17,000, $18,000 when I was working in radio. Wow. And they always talked about how diverse their hiring practices were. And it's like, well, you live in a poor city of diverse people and you don't hire from your city. Like, and that got me in trouble. And I eventually had to leave the radio station because I was given ultimatums and I was just like, you know what? I don't care. I'm done.
Oh, it's amazing how that works. Amazing how that works. One last story before I let you go, Peter. This AOC was in a conversation with Jon Stewart.
Oh, no.
Yeah, AOC was in a conversation with Jon Stewart. And AOC spills the beans. AOC spills the beans. That I would imagine there's going to be a lot of members of Congress would have preferred she not spill. Listen to what she says here. This is about insider trading that takes place in Congress. Because what people don't quite get, if you're in Congress and you're making laws and you know what's coming up, meaning you are making decisions about legislation that you're going to put out, you know how that legislation is going to impact certain things to the positive or to the benefit, and yet you're still buying stocks. And you're still like betting on the market when you know the direction that the market is going to take based on the legislation that you put forward. If, for example, if you are If you, for example, I'll give you a good example. Marijuana legislation is a good example.
Right.
So if Congress comes back, let's say it was completely legal, Congress says, we are going to make marijuana legal. Okay, then right off the bat, you know the marijuana companies are probably going to get a benefit for that, even though the rest of the public doesn't know that that's going to be something that's going to come up on the market. And I'm just using that as one example.
Sure.
You could have all sorts of examples of all sorts of stocks that are benefited or to the detriment based on policies that you put forward and legislation that you're going to put forward. Why the hell is Congress allowed to do this? So this is AOC spilling the beans.
An amount of hypocrisy, and the hypocrisy is what gets exploited to use the cynicism. And wherever there's a hypocritical window, for example, I think one of the most biggest examples of this is insider trading in Congress. Like,
dude, I don't know if I like, do I give snaps? I don't know what the kids do anymore, but like, dude, it is like, that's so crazy.
It's so crazy. It's crazy. I mean, like, and this is the thing. It's like people think that everyday people are stupid. I'm like, do you all really think that people don't see this shit? Like,
they sit on a committee, they get information about a drug or a contract or a thing. They immediately make a call. The stockbroker changes things, and their portfolio swells.
Explodes. It explodes.
What are we doing?
And you're doing this on public trust.
Right.
On like taxpayer finance, public, facilities. Like, it, of course.
You're regulating the market that you're trading on.
Exactly. And
you
like
run the casino.
And then we're supposed to act like money doesn't only corrupts Republicans. Give me a fucking break.
Where was that AOC several years ago?
I know. That is an astonishing clip, because AOC is cursing in that clip. She's dropping that bomb in that clip. No, I'm sorry. Like, yeah, she's right. She's right. And Mama Bear was able to get millions of dollars. Oh, I'm sorry, Peter. I pulled you off. Sorry.
Of course she's right. But I mean, I hate to say this, but it just reminds me of the whole Cenk Uygur thing.
Yes.
How many of us have been right for a very long time on that exact subject? We were critical. My partner and I, my ex-partner and I, when we did a podcast together, we were very critical of AOC over things like exactly that. Like, why aren't you calling out these things if you claim to be, populist and leftist and all of these things? If you claim to be a socialist, why aren't you talking about this? We've mentioned this specifically multiple times. Why is it now in 2024? Why is it now that you're saying this? This stuff it's been apparent for a long time. I hate to be so negative about it because it's 100% true.
Yeah.
Like, I agree with a lot of the things Cenk Uygur said. Yes, absolutely. But you guys are not naive actors. You are insiders. You know what's going on. Why is it now that it's okay to talk about? It's just,
it's obvious. I've lost my job. Now I need to pay my bill. It's like, hey, I know I just lost my job, but I really want to call and deal with this bill that I've accumulated now that I've lost my job.
Yeah.
Peter, man, thank you for this, Peter. Great. Always appreciate talking to you, man. I always enjoy these.
I always like talking to you as well, sir.
Thank you, my man. Peter Coffin. He's a journalist with over 250,000 YouTube subscribers, podcaster, and author. With their book, Custom Reality and You, they explore a world where profit is the driving force. There's also Horseshoe Theory. That is another book that he has out. So definitely check him out with that one also. You can follow Peter on YouTube and on Twitter at Peter Coffin. And you can purchase his book on Amazon.com. Peter.
Thank you so much, sir.
Enjoy your weekend, man. Have a good one.
You as well. Thank you.
All righty. Great conversation with Peter. And now let's have keep this good times rolling. We have Joe Emmonsberger. He is a journalist and author, co-writing Extraordinary Threat, the U.S. Empire, the Media, and 20 Years of Coup Attempts in Venezuela. Joe, welcome to the show, my man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
Good. Thank you for having me on. Thank you very much.
No, man, thank you for joining me. One of the interesting things associated with Donald Trump is this kind of pressure that he is most likely, there's a question of where he's going to put pressure around the globe. Now, a deranged Joe Biden has pretended that a new man or a different guy is president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido 2.0, despite the fact that this is outrageous, this is nonsense, this didn't work the last time around. This time around, though, Donald Trump is coming into office. Donald Trump has said he wants to end wars, not start them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to take this kind of kind eye towards Venezuela and Maduro, piggyback on what Joe Biden was doing. Do you think that's going to take place? Or do you think Trump is going to be preoccupied elsewhere? How, from your take, and maybe even from Venezuela's take, I haven't necessarily heard anything out of Venezuela on their let's say their tenor, their framing, their strategic way of dealing with Donald Trump. But maybe you can go into that for me. Do you consider any kind of difference in the way that Joe Biden was dealing with Maduro versus Trump dealing with Maduro? What are your thoughts?
I think it's too early to tell. It could be. It's quite possible that he'll be significantly even more aggressive than Biden. Biden did provide kind of a limited sanctions relief to Venezuela. I think because of the proxy war in Ukraine going bad for them and the pressure it put on global oil supplies. I think that motivated them to ease up a bit on Venezuela because they're preoccupied elsewhere, like you say. So a lot depends. But I mean, Trump's Secretary of State is Marco Rubio, who is absolutely deranged in his hatred for Venezuela. You remember in 2019, it was under Trump that there was a major coup attempt in 2019 at the Colombian border, and during that time, Marco Rubio went there and he posted pictures of the corpse of Colonel Gaddafi, and insinuating that was the same thing that was going to happen to Maduro. I mean, he was really deranged. Yeah, I think it's even more deranged than that. Possibly, I would say is that when there was blackouts, probably due to sabotage in Venezuela, there were energy grid having problems. Rubio took to Twitter to say that, to basically with glee to say, thanks to our sanctions, they can't fix the energy grid. And so just delighting in that openly, just a sick, deranged, twisted human being. And he's Trump's Secretary of State. So that obviously is a bad sign. The only thing you could is that Trump also has a history of turning on his own people, like he did with Bolton recently, like he did with Tillerson, like we did with many others. So how long is Rubio going to last in that role if he becomes inconvenient for Trump in some way? And he's publicly humiliated Marco Rubio before on the during
Little Marco.
So Trump is on. Having Marco Rubio Secretary of State looks horrible. Trump's track record on Venezuela is also horrific. I mean, he's the one who ramped up the sanctions in 2017 to make them really, really devastating. Obama started the sanctions, but Trump deliberately intensified them in 2017 in a dramatic way to make them much, much worse, and kept going. And then in 2019 went even a step further, recognizing Juan Guaido. But we remember this was when it comes to foreign policy, all the actors in Washington are united. I mean, Bernie Sanders was 100% behind, supportive of Trump's coup attempt in Venezuela, and now he voted for Marco Rubio, knowing what a deranged genocidal because Sanders is the same thing. They're all the same when it comes down to it. They're all the same thing. When it comes to foreign policy, especially, you see that there's no difference. You just had on AOC. She was effusive in thanking the Joe Biden for his leadership. Unscrupulous, absolutely no regard for Palestinian lives whatsoever. Just absolutely unscrupulous. So when it comes to foreign policy, there is no difference. So it's I don't anticipate Trump being radically different. He might be worse. It's hard to say though, because he's so unpredictable and there's so many counter pressures going on other places in the world that might apply pressure. For one thing, there's also Trump's commitment to mass deportation to Venezuela, which requires that he work with the Venezuelan government if he wants to pull that off somehow. Mm-hmm. So there's a counter pressure right there in his own platform that might work against him going berserk with but it's hard to say. Like I said, he's an unpredictable character, and at the end of the day, he has no problem being just maniacal and ruthless, but it's what he thinks is in his own interests, right?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say he's also transactional.
Yes.
In a way that Democrats aren't. Like, meaning Trump, at the very least, seems to be open to deals in a way that Democrats are just not. In their mind, is like, we're better. We're more, our morals are so much higher than anybody else. So if we're going in a particular direction, by definition, we are self-righteous. Almost by definition, like it's different. Like the way they deal with the stuff is slightly different.
It is somewhat different. You're right. And Trump is unpredictable, and all those things are true. But at the end of the day, I don't see any major changes. I see in the best case, I see just basically continuing Biden's policy. In the worst case, making it even worse, being even more aggressive. My personal opinion is I thought Trump in his first term was so fed so much garbage about Venezuela that in his mind it was just going to collapse because he said boo and everyone's going to go run. And then he realized, and then he basically embarrassed himself and then realized that was going to happen. But on the other hand, if he really learned his lesson, it doesn't seem like that if he appoints Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State. So who knows what's going on there. He's an unpredictable character, and you're right, he is somewhat transactional. He's not as his ideology is more just whatever benefits me.
That's fair. That's fair take.
Well, who knows? It's hard to say.
And you're right. It could be worse, or it could be status quo on Venezuela, especially if he gets concerned with other issues. Venezuela might be a low priority for him, but we'll see.
Exactly.
I am interested on this notion of immigration because you made a really good point that in order to send back people to Venezuela, on some level, you're going to have to work with Venezuela to do that. Because I don't know how you transport people to Venezuela.
You're not going to work with Edmundo Gonzalez. He's not going to.
Yeah, right.
For you.
Right. So how does that work, right? Like, so okay, when people are leaving Venezuela, they are getting on a plane and coming to the U.S. They're getting on a plane going to Mexico. How does that work? Especially
in Venezuela's case, a lot of the better off are just getting tourist visas or student visas and overstaying them. But I don't know how much now. It's much more likely that they'll come the same way other people do, right up through Panama, through Panama and Central America, then through Mexico. Yeah, that it's a more onerous path, because if they're lower income people who don't have the option of getting some kind of student visa or tourist visa or something and just overstaying it, right? So I think more people now, and the immigration from Venezuela to U.S. is now significant. It wasn't the case for many years, but now it's become somewhat. I looked at the figures a few years ago, not what some people are claiming, but still, yeah, it's pretty significant now. So it's not like it's a tiny percentage of the illegal immigration anymore. So it's pretty big, thanks to U.S. sanctions. So
now, are they walking or is it a bus? Because like you said, if they're poor, they can't get a flight. It's not like they're getting a flight, or it's not like they're overstaying their visas.
So,
if they're walking,
basically, well, through the transportation, those through various forms of on ground transportation, right? In some cases, it's some borders they'll have to. Walk, and it's very dangerous, right? That's why you have at the border these horrific things that can happen at the U.S. border sometimes, right? But you basically, a lot of people end up paying coyotes, as they call them, to facilitate, this transfer of people. My family's from Ecuador, and I know a lot of people who've paid $10,000 and a very significant amount for them. And to have their illegal travels through those countries kind of facilitated, and it's very risky because sometimes these people just take the money and do God knows what to, just rob you, or there's all sorts of horror stories because you're putting your hands in people who are doing something illegal, and you're trying to trust them, right? So it's a very dangerous thing to do. It's a dangerous way to try to make it into the United States. But people have been doing it.
I'm curious. Has has it been any reporting on how Maduro is looking at dealing with a Trump administration, or from his point of view, whether it's Trump or Biden, these things are effectively the same?
I think this time it's pretty clear that Maduro has a much better sense of Trump. I think they were very they were fed some bad information, thinking they took seriously Trump's isolationist rhetoric. I think the first time he took office, they even as a kind of a token of good faith, they even made a small donation to his inauguration, thinking, this is somebody. Oh, maybe this is somebody because you remember Trump did a lot of isolationist rhetoric, a lot of America first. A lot of the America first rhetoric was like, we're not going to be bothering with other countries, right? And so I think Maduro's people inside Maduro's government were convinced that, now we have a chance here. This might be somebody we can get along with, right? So, and then Trump was dramatically worse than Obama. Yeah. So, but I think this time around, I think they're okay. Like they realize, okay, this guy's kind of nuts. They're always, no matter how bad the administration's been in the United States, no matter how bad the government's been, they've always been open to talking because Venezuela's in a weak position. They can't, they're not Russia, right? They don't have the option of militarily asserting themselves against the United States. But so they have to be open to dialogue with whoever, no matter how bad they are. So that's the same. But I don't see the same naivete. They weren't as naive this time around. They've seen what Trump was, so they're not. Yeah, they don't have to take. They know what all of us know, that he's not somebody you can predict very easily. So you got to be careful.
Explain something to me. The sanctions that are being applied, Venezuela doesn't have the capability of working with or trading with other governments in the region. Because I was talking to someone about Cuba at one point, and I guess I had the same question with them. I mean, there are other countries in the world other than the United States to trade with. The sanctions themselves, how the sanctions themselves preventing trade from, let's say, Russia or China. I know those are much further away, but just for sake of the argument, or for that matter, the countries that are in the region themselves. How I know the U.S. is a dominant force in the region and a dominant country.
Right.
Why do the sanctions prevent Venezuela from getting, let's say, various goods from other countries? And go into that for me. Like, how are the sanctions preventing them from getting trade elsewhere?
Yeah, what it all stems from is from the power of the U.S. financial system, the dominance of the U.S. financial system. There's a very good interview that Ben Norton did with Andres Arauz, who's a former head of the Central Bank of Ecuador, and he explained when two countries, let's say Argentina and Chile, they want to do trade with each other. The U.S. financial system is so dominant that even though it's trade just between those two countries, the flow of money ends up inevitably going through the United States financial system. Yeah, because they have to get money and they have to send the money to here. The flow of money is very indirect, and it ends up, even if it travels briefly through the U.S. financial system, that already gives the United States an opportunity to stick their nose in and say, we have the right to block this or to start launching lawsuits and stuff. In recent years back, several years ago, that a U.S. judge was able to basically sanction Argentina because the bonds that the Argentinian government was unable to pay, they were held up in the U.S. financial system, therefore subject to U.S. law. So the so-called vultures that were trying to shake down Argentina, they had the backing of the U.S. courts. It's because the U.S. financial system is still such a dominant system that it ends up getting its nose, being able to stick its nose everywhere. Now that's starting to change, but not in my opinion, not quickly enough. I mean, Russia and BRICS, they're trying to form alternative payment systems, so you don't have this ridiculous situation that country A wants to trade with country B, and yet the money has to flow through the U.S. I mean, what the hell's that? It's between country A and country B. U.S. has nothing to do with it. Why should the money even for a nanosecond have to go through the U.S. financial system? But that's the way the system has been set up to work. And like I said, if you watch that interview with Ben Norton and Andres Arauz, it gets a very nice explanation of it. And that's what empowers the U.S. That's what makes the U.S. sanctions so powerful. basically the size and depth of the U.S. financial system is still so big, and that has to be overcome, and it is being overcome with China, with Russia, with BRICS and all that, but it's kind of not. I would hope
slow.
It's slow. It's slow relative, especially when you consider the damage being done to countries in real time as we speak. The process of adapting to that. Yeah, you always see headlines. This is changing, that, and you do see in the stats. At one point, it was like all central banks had 60% of the reserves in the U.S. financial system is dropping, right? Like, I don't know, maybe it's 57 or something. But it's slow. It's a slow decline, and we want to see that go faster.
I mean, what it was like 75%, if not more, at one point, and it's down to 50-something% now. As a direct result.
That sounds about right. If you look at a long enough point of time, it's slow.
Is Venezuela trying to get into BRICS? And has there been any talk about it?
Yeah, it was blocked by Brazil.
Why? Why was it? That's what I thought. That's what I thought. That Lula did something like that. Lula has a hard on for Venezuela, for Maduro.
Yeah.
Why? Why is there this chaos?
In my opinion, he's just straight up being pressured. He just has a gun to his head somehow. He was in prison for a year. I think the most obvious explanation is they leaned on him. Who knows what they have on him or what they've threatened him with? He has a very vicious.
You really think that Lula, after being in jail? I mean, because
I think because he was in jail. I think maybe they broke him down. Maybe they threatened somebody. Who knows? But I think it's naive to think that they are pressuring him very, very strenuously. That's the kind of thing that they managed to put him in jail for a year. I mean, who knows what else they managed to do? Compromise his family or whatever. And he's obviously under huge pressure. And the right wing in Brazil is very vicious. They could get back in power. Who knows what they'll do to him if they get back in power? And it's just a very easy, for the so-called left in Latin America. Sometimes they want to kiss up to Washington by basically throwing Venezuela under the bus, or Nicaragua. Oddly, not as much Cuba, but they'll do that, right? I think in Cuba's case, the sanctions on Cuba have been so brutal. They've been in place for so long. That's one reason that they're so unpopular, that the sanctions, the whole embargo, that maybe it's not as cool to be in support of them, but anyways, Brazil played that role, so that's very, very alarming.
Okay, so the right wing in Brazil is okay with the sanctions being removed for Cuba, but not necessarily, or they don't care as much about the sanctions.
I want to talk about the right wing. The right wing wants to crush Cuba. They hate Cuba, but I'm saying the kind of Lula left, the weak left. the Petro left, the Boric left, those guys. They really like to throw Venezuela under the bus. They really like to portray themselves as the good left by dumping on Venezuela, and that's their thing. So that's disappointing. But I think it's shows the power of the right, the power of U.S. imperialism, and of course the vicious right wing in these countries. That's what these so-called leftist presidents often feel obliged to do. Rather than take the kind of stand we'd like to see them take a much more courageous stand. But that's
if this level of pressure wasn't applied to Venezuela, I have this firm belief that sometimes pressure being applied to a country creates these kind of fortress country conditions, where it's like you're forced to look around to see whether or not there are spies or spooks in every corner, because there most notably may be a spook in every corner. Mm-hmm. And so it forces the government to get far more insular in the way that the government behaves. Like, it's kind of hard to have this kind of open government. I mean, hell, let's not even say Venezuela. You can go to Georgia, for example. And the way that they're trying to use this kind of Maidan 2.0 to overthrow the government of Georgia. Okay, well, what does it do from the standpoint of your government when you need to be far more aggressive in ensuring that your government doesn't collapse? It's very difficult to have this kind of open, laissez-faire republic or democracy under those terms. I suspect that Venezuela on some level is the same way for this. With Maduro, from your point of view, in an election that was somewhat, how popular is Maduro in Venezuela? Let's start there.
But Maduro, I'd say, probably has a very solid 30% of the electorate. That's what he's shown. Like in the worst, when you're able to get 30% of the electorate to vote for you under the horrendous conditions that Venezuela has, that's solid support. That's not fickle support that's gonna go away, tomorrow or something. That's very solid support.
Now, no, please.
Yeah, so that's what I would say. So that's the solid base of support. And if you think about it, in most elections, and we wrote about this in our book, if you look at the actual percentage of the electorate that most so-called democracies like in Canada and the United States, that's typically what the winning governments get. They usually get less than that. When you look at the actual, because there's so much abstention, right? So when you look at how many people actually show up to vote for them, you're looking at 25, 30% of the electorate that actually support them. So that's the kind of support Maduro has. And frankly, when you talk about democracy, Venezuela is democratic, but part of being a democracy has to be, and this is what a lot of leftists don't want to accept, part of being a democracy means defending yourself against foreign aggression.
Oh, agree.
Being a democracy does not oblige you to let yourself be overthrown. But we have too many so-called leftists who seem to think that, they should just roll over. I
agree. That's why I started with the premise of it creates this kind of fortress country, because you have to defend yourself. I mean, like when Georgia is putting out the cops in order to prevent a Maidan from happening. Okay, well, they're defending themselves. It's like we believe in sovereignty, and part of sovereignty is being able to defend yourself from foreign threats.
Right.
And the same thing would be true for Venezuela or any other country, Cuba, anywhere else. Let's move to Ecuador for a bit. I have to be honest, I am fascinated in a negative way about what has happened in Ecuador. I had the opportunity to go to Ecuador. This was, like a decade ago.
Right.
Loved it.
Yeah.
It was safe at the time. I went puttering about all through Quito. And that is not the way it is today. I mean, I remember, I think it was last year when we were covering the election, one of the candidates got murdered by the gangs.
Right.
And it's very possible that murder got blamed on the left, which tilted the results or tilted the election. I mean, just astonishing stuff.
Yeah.
What happened to Ecuador? How did it develop? It was one of the safest countries in South America, and somewhere along the way, it collapsed.
The huge original sin, the colossal blunder that was made in Ecuador was by Correa's government. Rafael Correa was president from 2007 till 2017. And he presided over, he was an extremely successful president. The violent crime, the homicide rate fell by 2/3. Poverty fell by about half. Wow. There was major improvements in roads and public services. And he also did other impressive things like protect Julian Assange from the U.S. government, expelled a military base of the United States that they had in a city called Manta. He expelled them. He allied with Venezuela. He was not one of these Boric Lula leftists. He supported Venezuela. So he was a very courageous president, very successful president. But he made one colossal blunder, was he bought into this whole idea that we should be able to revise our leadership. I should be, it shouldn't just depend on me. Because he was getting attacked saying, "Oh, you want to be president forever? You're going to be around forever." And he was like, "No, I'm going to." And he actually got goaded into buying into these ideas that, no, I got to step away. And he let his vice president. He basically endorsed his vice president, Lenin Moreno, to run and take over the project. And Lenin Moreno, within weeks, revealed himself to be a complete fraud. I mean, just it was stunning. He basically, when he won, it was if the right wing had won. I mean, I'm disgusted with Lula, some of the things Lula's done, but this makes Lula look like a saint. Like he was like a total wolves and show, and it exposed the fact that Correa was naive about the kind of people he had around him, kind of people who were telling him what he wanted to hear, pretending they supported the process, and in reality they were working for the other side. So when you talk about the pressures on, we were talking about who knows what's going on with Lula and what's going on with the people around him, right? Well, this was just dramatically revealed to be the case. So when Moreno got in, imagine you have somebody within your own movement, your own party, who can then start destroying everything. That it was a huge blow to Correa's credibility, for one, to the movement's credibility, and I think that's hurt them. Because now whenever Correa endorses somebody, well, there's always going to be doubt, right? Is this guy another Lenin Moreno? There's always going to be a doubt. Right?
And that's the other issue, right? Because then Moreno turned around and tried to prosecute Correa.
Oh yeah, he has like dozens of legal investigations, lawsuits. He's been convicted. It's all a joke. I mean, they're so complex that you'd have to go into the details of them, but they're basically ridiculous lawsuits, ridiculous charges. His vice president who remained loyal, the one vice president who remained loyal, Jorge Glass, is in jail. The current president invaded the Mexican embassy in Quito to kidnap him. It was just flagrant violation of international.
That was recent.
Right.
Yeah, that was recent. Yeah,
that was a few years ago. Yeah, I know. It's just unbelievable. Well, that's the huge blunder that allowed the right wing to get in. And now with all the you have Correa can't return to Ecuador, can't run for office. So that's a big problem right away, because people at the end of the day, it's not the same having Correa run as having somebody Correa appoints run. It's always more difficult. Now they've done well. Like they've come close to winning to getting back into power, to getting the presidency back. They have the largest number of seats because they have this at least 30% solid support. And if it goes down to a second round of election, they've come up just a little bit short of what they need to get back in. But with all so many people being thrown into jail, threatened with jail, and all the other stuff that's been done against them, it's impressive that they've hung on, but they haven't been able to quite get back into power again. And now I don't know if they'll get back into power this election coming up. I have no idea. I don't know. Some polls favor Correa's chosen the candidate Correa endorses, Luisa Gonzalez. Some polls favor Noboa to get reelected. So it's hard to say. He has the entire media establishment behind him. He's one of the richest men in Ecuador, if not the richest. So he's got money behind him. He's got the U.S. government behind him. The U.S. government's been totally 100% behind this right-wing shift in Ecuador. Totally supportive of him. As soon as Moreno revealed himself to be a traitor and a right-winger, the Washington Post never talks about Ecuador. They're writing editorials talking about how wonderful Moreno is.
That's horrible.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been horrible, but and it's hard to get back. It's hard to get back in. So we see this idea, that sometimes the left does it to themselves. They buy into the liberal rules, the liberal discourse of, let's change up the leadership. Don't be a Fidel Castro. Don't stay around for a long time. And that's nonsense. If you have a leader you trust and he's doing well, you hang on to him. You don't find that those don't grow on trees. In the case of Chavismo, Chavez was lucky that Maduro proved to be a worthy successor, devoted to the process. I mean, it doesn't always happen that they're treated, but it's not something you if you have a leader who's healthy, who can stay in power, you should stay in power. You don't give up power.
Good. Yeah. If they're doing the job, they're doing the job well. Screw this nonsense of, hey, maybe you should step aside.
Yeah.
It's the good thing to do. Oh yeah, you're right. Maybe I should step aside. But how did Moreno unravel because I remember he was so weak. Weak is an understatement. Correa had this very strong idea of sovereignty. I remember with the U.S. base, he was like, hey, can we put a Ecuadorian base on U.S. soil? They was like, hell no. He was like, okay, well, hell no, put this base thing here. He had this clear idea of Ecuadorian sovereignty where he had this full belief that, this is not this kind of Monroe Doctrine where you guys are going to have this kind of run roughshod over Ecuador. How did Moreno unravel what Correa was doing in a way that adversely affected the security and safety of Ecuador, because that's the issue, right? Like it fundamentally changed where the gangs are now taking over.
Yeah. Well, one fundamental thing, one very important move he made was he held a referendum because he was at the height of his popularity. He just got elected. He said, "Oh, I'm going to clean up." His line originally was that he was going to clean up correísmo, that he was going to clean up the corruption. He was like, "Oh yeah, I'm kind of a Correaist, but I'm not really Correa, but I'm going to clean things up now. There was corruption. I'm going to clean it up." So he held a referendum, which allowed him. It was a very deceitful referendum and a bunch. But bottom line, it allowed him to appoint a body that basically went around that was empowered to act as if it was a constituent assembly, even though its members weren't elected. They were chosen by Moreno. They were handpicked by Moreno. Moreno had a short list of names that he submitted to the National Assembly and said, you have to pick these guys. And from there, they changed out the Judicial Council, the prosecutors, so basically he just the whole apparatus of the state was just totally reconfigured to favor the right wing, and that greatly facilitated all the legal persecution of Correa. They fired the entire Constitutional Court and replaced them all. So they just did a total revamp of the state. Now, a revamp of the state it has happened in Latin America a lot. It kind of happened in Ecuador, but it's usually done by electing a constituent assembly. Right? You actually elect each member of the Constituent Assembly. They can rewrite the Constitution, make sweeping changes. That was done in Venezuela. That was done in Ecuador. That was done in Bolivia. But this was not done by an elected body. This was a hand-picked body by Moreno, right? And he just basically just made sure that all the regulators and judges, it was a way to make sure that the entire state apparatus facilitated all the persecution and other ridiculous things that happened. And it just downsized the state. A lot of the insecurity has to do with just downsizing the state, getting rid of common sense legislation. Under Correa, for instance, very strict requirements, polygraph tests if you wanted to be a police officer, where they would ask you, have you taken bribes? Do you know anyone who's taken bribes? Just basic common sense stuff to clean up that was all dismantled. So it was just a right-wing fantasy of downsizing the state and persecuting the left. So that's one of the key things he did to bring about this change. And ever since then, it's just continued since then. Correa's held on to enough of a base to remain a force as an opposition, but not enough yet, as of yet, to get back into power and to try to do something to fix all this. In fact, one of the things the Correas now say is if they win power, they're going to have to elect a constituent assembly just to undo all the damage that Moreno did with this body that he picked to revamp the state.
That is astonishing. So if Nablu loses, do you see a capacity to get back to this kind of safety and security? Because the problem with all this stuff is always, if I gain 200 pounds, it's going to take a while to lose that 200 pounds. And it's like you move in a particular direction and it's hard to kind of rewrite the ship. You've allowed gangs to get a certain amount of power and prominence. Not just power and prominence, you've allowed gangs to murder a presidential candidate, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Which,
it's going to be difficult. They're going to have to be bold and courageous to do it. It's first step is getting in. The second, they're going to need a constituent assembly to sort of, because so many people in the judiciary, in the regulatory apparatus have been appointed in a flagrantly unconstitutional, shady way. That's why it's right. So now they have to undo that. They have to elect a constituent assembly. They have to try to undo all that. And that's going to take bold moves. And there's a threat now. The military's penetrated with these rotten people and the police and everything. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be, Correa was almost overthrown in a coup in 2010, right? So it's going to be no easy task. So is Luisa Gonzalez up to it? I hope so. I don't know for sure if she's going to be bold enough. If she isn't, if she does get in and she isn't bold enough, she won't make, if she doesn't change, and the population doesn't see enough improvement, then it'll be disastrous. The right wing will take power again and just continue trashing the country. So it's a tough spot they're in. And again, it all stems from this blunder that they made in 2017, overconfidence overconfident because things were going so well too, so there's an overconfidence that, well, things have changed, you could just get somebody to just kind of continue just steering the ship, just but it was a huge misunderstanding of the world we live in, and of the kind of situation that can happen if a traitor gets in, right?
Wow. I got to be honest, I was shocked with Moreno.
Mm-hmm.
I was completely shocked. And I felt like it was like Jesus. It was like blindsided.
Oh yeah.
But he was so weak. Like he was like folding under U.S. pressure. I remember it was one of the first things I remember was the baby formula thing. And he just folded like a cheap suit.
He expelled Assange. He expelled Assange from the embassy in London. He everything he did was to please the United States, to please the Western media, and they loved it. They loved him for it, and he destroyed the country. The country.
Astonishing. Joe, man, thank you for this. I'm thank you for this. Always appreciate these conversations. It's like you give us updates on what is taking place in these parts of the world, and always appreciate your take, man. Thank you for this.
Thanks for inviting me. Take care.
Joe Emmetsberger. He is a journalist, author, and co-writer of Extraordinary Threat, the U.S. Empire, the Media, and 20 Years of Attempts on Venezuela. Man, you have a good one. All right. We have come to the end. Oh, we have chats. DC, the nation was literally founded on insurrection. Yes, it was. And you heard him point out that there are times where you're pushed against the wall that are required some level of, let's say, provocative action in order to remedy the issue. And yeah, this country was born in the fires of revolution. Yes, agreed. Media covered up the laptop story, but the election is legit. Well, I mean, that's the rub with, well, yes, I don't believe for a moment that Donald Trump won that election. I just don't. Donald Trump had all the money in the world to try to prove otherwise. He could not do it. And the laptop story was obviously legit. I mean, for God's sake, you had Hunter Biden doing crack. You had Hunter Biden measuring his penis. At any point, you could say, is that your penis, Hunter Biden? In which case, you would have had to answer yes or no. Hey, Hunter, were you really able to get that many M&Ms on your penis? Was that you banging that porn star? Was that you doing crack? Was that you? Meaning, all of those things are evidence to the point that this was his laptop. It was obviously his laptop. The feds knew it was his laptop going back to 2019. That is a radical difference as opposed to an election that Donald Trump just lost. Just saying. Donald Drasnovich, super sticker. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you. Did I say Donald or Daniel? Daniel Drasnovich. Thank you, my man. And Gary Kogan. Jamal does good work. He's my, what is that? Widow's mitts. Widow's mite. I can't see if that says mitt or mite. I don't know what that means. What is a widow's mite? I don't know what that means. Widow's mite. I have no idea what that means. I've never heard that phrasing before. But Gary Kogan, I don't know what that is, but I appreciate it. Thank you very much. We've come to the end. I want to thank all of you for joining me. I have to be honest. I was dragging ass this morning, but we got through the show. Really good guests, really good conversations. In fact, we had really good conversations this morning, and we had a really good crowd. Look, I'm going to say like it, share it, subscribe to it. If you guys dig this content and you find yourself coming back here often, you can always support the content through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. Even $1 helps. Like I said, buy me a cup of coffee. I appreciate you for it. I mean, after all, every morning I have my coffee. It gets me going within 30 minutes or so. But look, I want to thank all of you. You guys enjoy your weekend. You be safe this weekend. Try to stay warm this weekend, depending upon where you are. It is cold here in Virginia. Have a good weekend, guys. Jamal Thomas Morning Show episode. What episode are we? 83. 83 episodes. 83 episodes. You guys have a phenomenal weekend. Jamal Thomas Morning Show 83, signing off.